A quiet summer afternoon shatters as five ruthless outlaws surround Harriet Welburn, a frail widow living alone on an isolated ranch. But these men have unknowingly made a deadly miscalculation. Harriet isn't who she appears. Once feared as Scarlet Harriet Galloway, the most cunning and notorious outlaw leader in the West, she has buried her past beneath the humble disguise of age and vulnerability. As the gang closes in, Harriet's hidden skills burst forth in a thrilling showdown that leaves her enemies stunned and fighting for their lives. Friends, you won't want to miss this powerful tale of deception, courage, and redemption. Stay tuned to discover whether Harriet can protect her secrets, her gold, and the peaceful life she's built, or if her violent past finally catches up to her. If you enjoy gripping tales of frontier justice, courage under fire, and hidden identities, please subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more incredible stories like this one. The late summer sun hung like a molten disk in the sky above the small frontier settlement of Peacehaven Fork, its rays baking the dusty stretch of road that led to Harriet Welburn's remote homestead. Around mid-afternoon, as the temperature peaked, Harriet sat on her modest wooden porch, her posture straight despite the lines of age etched into her face. Her hair, once a vivid copper, was now mostly silver, bound tightly in a bun that revealed the angles of a face that had seen 60-plus years of both hardship and triumph. Dressed in a worn but freshly laundered gray dress, Harriet embodied the image of a quiet widow, someone minding her own business and preparing for the evening's simple tasks. She was carefully mending a quilt whose pattern had been passed down through generations. No one glancing at her would suspect that the woman they saw had once roamed the Western Territories under the name Scarlet Harriet Galloway, better known in old-dime novels and battered wanted posters as a ruthless outlaw queen. The Welburn name had appeared in Peacehaven Fork about a decade earlier, attached to a respectable widow who purchased a piece of fertile land on the valley's north ridge. She kept to herself, grew a small orchard, and occasionally walked into town with fresh apples or jars of homemade preserves. To the townsfolk, Harriet was an aging woman, content to live out her twilight years in tranquility. She was always polite, always gracious, and always, it seemed, somewhat distant. Over the years, neighbors accepted her presence without prying, confident that her story was that of an ordinary settler's widow. The local sheriff tipped his hat whenever they crossed paths, remarking what a kind soul she was, to bring pies and crocheted blankets to the older folks in the settlement. That August afternoon, Harriet was not alone. Inside the sturdy home constructed of logs, well-cured planks, and a foundation of stone, her much younger companion, Anna Morley, was inspecting the pantry, reorganizing supplies for the coming autumn. Officially, Anna was Harriet's widowed niece arrived from back east to help with the more strenuous tasks and keep an old aunt company. Unofficially, Anna knew enough about Harriet's past to recognize that the older woman was anything but helpless. And she also knew through her own experience of hard knocks that Harriet had once walked a path far more treacherous than anyone in Peacehaven Fork could imagine. Anna was 27, with a lithe figure and intense brown eyes that seldom gave away her thoughts. A well-worn rifle was never far from her reach, and Harriet had taught her exactly how to use it. The midday heat shimmered on the horizon as Harriet paused in her sewing and gazed westward. From her vantage point, she could see a slight rise in the trail that snaked across the gently sloping terrain. The grasses had turned a dull straw color under weeks of relentless sun, and the tips of the distant mountains beyond Peacehaven Fork showed only the faintest hint of pine life on the homestead demanded constant vigilance, if not against nature, then against the less savory travelers who sometimes wandered through Harriet's outwardly gentle routine of quilting and gardening concealed an alert mind. She was always assessing small changes in the environment. A swirl of dust in the distance, a shape on the horizon, or the abrupt silence of birds could mean visitors. By the time Harriet spotted the faint forms of 4 riders approaching from the west, a swirl of dust marking their passage. Her instincts had already warned her. She squinted against the glare of the sun, observing how they rode in close formation, how each man carried himself in the saddle, as though used to long miles on the trail. Their approach was neither leisurely nor hurried, purposeful, but cautious. She pretended not to watch them. Instead, she resumed her rhythmic stitching, each motion slow and deliberate, her gnarled fingers steady in a way that belied her age. If anyone had asked her about those approaching men, Harriet would have smiled and said they were simply travelers needing a drink of water. But inside, something sparked an echo of the younger self who had once led raids on stagecoaches and trains. She briefly closed her eyes, recalling a time when she was known by another name. In a prior life, Harriet Welburn had been Harriet Galloway, Scarlet Harriet, the infamous woman whose cunning and daring rattled rail companies from Kansas to Montana. She and her gang had outwitted the best federal marshals on horseback and Pinkerton agents alike. In her youth, Harriet had worn a bold smile, brandishing firearms with the self-assured ease of the truly fearless. Tales of her robberies, carefully planned and executed without leaving many bodies behind, had circulated in distant cities for years. Certain Pinkerton men once insisted that Harriet must be a myth or a man in disguise. No woman could be that cunning, that bold, and remain uncaptured. Eventually, after what many thought was her death at Red Cliff Gulch, or so, the newspapers reported Harriet Galloway vanished from all public mention. Her name faded until only a handful of old lawmen even remembered the legend of Scarlet Harriet Galloway. But Harriet did not feel particularly legendary at this moment. She felt every bit her age, a faint ache in her back from stooping over the sewing for too long, and a dryness in her throat that her lemonade nearby only half quenched. Even so, as the riders drew near, Harriet shifted the sewing needle in her hand, a reflex that placed her wrist at a subtly strategic angle. In a pinch, that needle or the short dagger concealed within her thread basket could serve as a hidden weapon. There was an old adage Harriet lived by: never be unarmed. Even in her new life of quiet days and orchard harvests, she had never relaxed that rule. By the time the riders reined in before her front yard, 4 horses blowing dust from their nostrils, the sun had passed its zenith, sliding toward the western hills. The lead rider, tall with a jagged scar running from temple to jaw, removed his hat politely. However, in Harriet's experienced gaze, she recognized that the courtesy didn't quite reach his steely eyes. He glanced around, noting Harriet's unassuming appearance and the modest homestead, but Harriet could sense his mind calculating possibilities, threats and vulnerabilities. "Afternoon, ma'am," he called, voice smooth, but with an undercurrent that set Harriet's nerves on edge. "Name's Rowan Delgado. My companions and I have been riding a while. Could we trouble you for a bit of water for our horses?" Harriet set the quilt aside, letting her old bones creak a bit as she stood. She pressed a hand to her lower back and forced a small groan. These days the aches were real enough, but she also found it helpful to exaggerate them for effect. "Course you can," she replied, adding a faint quiver to her voice. "I know the heat's no friend to travelers. The pump's around back by the barn, y'all help yourselves." While the men dismounted and led their horses toward the back of the property, Harriet ambled slowly into the house, leaving her porch rocking chair with a quiet finality. Once inside, she closed the door behind her, pausing to let her heart settle back to its normal rhythm. No matter how many years she spent in relative peace, the arrival of strangers always stirred a flicker of anxiety. Harriet had never truly let go of the sense that eventually someone would connect the widow, Harriet Welburn, to the elusive Scarlet Harriet Galloway. Across the small living space, Anna Morley stood rifle in hand. She'd been peering through a gap in the curtains, eyes sharp. "They're sizing up the place," Anna said, her voice hushed. "One of them is headed toward the barn, another is scanning the perimeter." Harriet exhaled. "I'd expect nothing less. Men who travel in groups of 4 rarely do so for honest reasons, especially if only one does all the talking." She approached Anna, placing a hand on the younger woman's shoulder. "Stay calm, just like we practiced." The interior of Harriet's home was simpler than one might expect from someone with her rumored past. Aside from a few crocheted blankets and old quilts, the decor was sparse: no trophies, no fancy furniture, no sign of wealth. Beneath those humble trappings, however, were hidden compartments and concealed vantage points. Over the years, Harriet had transformed her homestead into a fortress of subtle defenses. She had installed thick oak doors, narrow windows that doubled as rifle slits, and a back cellar exit that opened into a ravine hidden by tall brush. The barn, though modest in appearance, had a reinforced rear wall, an elevated hayloft perfect for an ambush, and multiple false stalls for storing contraband or providing cover. Harriet had designed every detail for the day when her past might rear its head. Anna slung the rifle over her arm as Harriet passed her. The older woman's limp was more pronounced today, likely from the dampness in the air after the brief rainfall overnight. Harriet considered offering refreshments as a gesture of hospitality, a custom so ingrained in frontier life that refusing a weary traveler's request for water was an insult. But Harriet also knew that courtesy and cunning often went hand in hand. If these riders meant harm, letting them draw close and lower, their guard could be to her advantage. Turning to Anna, Harriet spoke in a low voice. "Set the kettle on for coffee, and keep your eyes open." She then moved to the hidden panel beneath the sink, retrieving a small but finely crafted revolver. Slipping it into the deep pocket of her apron, she straightened, forcing herself to appear every bit the frail widow again. "We'll treat them decently if they behave. If not, we'll do what we must." Anna nodded. She had grown up the daughter of a traveling medicine show performer and had learned early how to read crowds, how to tell when someone was on the verge of trouble. After her mother died, Anna drifted through various frontier towns, picking up work as a seamstress or a cook's helper. She'd been cornered more than once by rough men seeking an easy target, and it was Harriet encountering Anna in the aftermath of a brawl in a dusty roadside tavern who had offered her shelter and guidance. From Harriet, Anna learned that a woman could be both cunning and strong. Harriet recognized in Anna the potential for resilience, a willingness to fight back if given the means. In the 2 years they'd lived together, Harriet had taught Anna to handle firearms, to set tripwires, and to plan out defensive positions in the event of an attack. "Don't rely on luck," Harriet would often say, "rely on your preparation." Peeking out the window again, Harriet watched Rowan Delgado's second man, shorter, wiry, stride along the side of the barn, examining the walls as if something about them piqued his curiosity. Harriet felt a brief surge of concern. If he found the hidden back wall or the small slot designed for crossfire, it might betray that Harriet's homestead was far from typical. But the man only shook his head and walked on, perhaps suspecting but not certain of anything. The main door creaked open as the men returned. Leading their horses, Rowan Delgado stood at the threshold of Harriet's home with a practiced attempt at politeness. "Ma'am, your barn's in fine shape. Mind if we step inside for a spell? My men could use a moment out of the sun." Harriet's gaze flicked to Anna, who gave a subtle nod before retreating into the next room. Harriet forced a benign smile. "Of course, come in. I'll bring some lemonade and coffee." She ushered them into the main room where she motioned to chairs around a wooden table. The moment they entered, Harriet's senses went on high alert. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed the man with the scar, Rowan scanning the inside just as carefully as he had the barn. Another, whom Harriet would later identify as Dylan Delgado, ran his fingertips over the mantel, picking up a small wooden carving, as if weighing its value. Before Harriet even set the tray of cups down, Rowan Delgado cleared his throat. "You live here all alone. Mrs. Harriet paused a fraction of a second. "Mrs. Welburn," she answered, her voice a gentle tremor. "My husband built this house before he passed. God rest his soul. I manage all right, though it can be lonely now and then." She forced a tight laugh. "But the quiet suits me at my age." Rowan's gaze locked on hers, and for a heartbeat, Harriet sensed he wasn't buying the kindly older widow act. But then he leaned back, placing his dusty hat on the table with a slow, deliberate motion. "There's talk in Peacehaven Fork about a widow with a tidy little nest egg out this way. You wouldn't happen to be her, would you?" Harriet felt her stomach tighten. She recognized the line of questioning from 1,000 past encounters, men fishing for weaknesses or hidden fortunes. Harriet responded with a carefully measured shrug. "I've saved a bit, thanks to a meager pension, and by growing a decent orchard, I keep chickens and goats too. Nothing to entice outlaws, I reckon." Silence briefly settled. The men drank from the cups Harriet offered, though Rowan, ever cautious, only pretended to sip. Harriet saw that gesture the man was either suspicious of poison or simply someone who never let his guard down. She had met men like Rowan Delgado countless times in her previous life, calculating, hungry for control, projecting confidence in every move. If Harriet had not spent years outsmarting Pinkerton detectives and rival gang leaders, she might have found him intimidating. Anna returned with a second tray, setting down a pitcher of lemonade on the table. Her eyes caught Harriet's for a half second, a nonverbal check-in, Harriet gave her the smallest nod, indicating that she remained in command of the situation. Rowan introduced his men in a rushed manner. Dylan Delgado, who was evidently the more refined of the group, Jeb Delgado, a brawny figure with a surly expression who seemed to prefer scowling over speaking, and Mace Delgado, lean and watchful, the one who had circled the barn. There was mention of a fifth brother, Toby Delgado, who waited outside with the horses or so. Rowan indicated might be exploring the yard. Harriet silently noted the mismatch earlier. She counted 4 men, and now Rowan claimed 5. Perhaps Toby was doubling back or scanning for vantage points. Rowan set his half-empty cup down. Mrs. Welburn, we do appreciate your hospitality, but I won't lie. The real reason we're here is we heard rumors about some old treasure in these parts. His smile was amiable, but Harriet caught the flash of greed in his eyes. A lost stash from the old days when outlaws roamed. Feigning confusion, Harriet tilted her head. Treasure. There are always stories. Folks around here love to spin tales. Dylan chuckled softly, a sound that held no real warmth. Perhaps, but rumor has it that someone living near Peacehaven Fork might know the truth of those riches. Some call them the Western Union Gold Eagles. Others say it's leftover Confederate coin. But we keep hearing that an older woman might be sitting on something valuable. Anna, hovering near the doorway, stiffened, but Harriet calmly stirred the lemonade with a wooden spoon. Western Union Gold Eagles. Why, I read about that once in the old newspapers. Didn't the Pinkertons chase some woman gang leader across half the territory for those missing coins? At this, Jeb Delgado scoffed. A woman gang leader. That's just a tall tale for penny novels. Real men do the heavy lifting. His tone was dismissive, but Harriet's lips curved slightly, recalling her own father's scornful words about women's limitations. She'd proved men like that wrong more times than she cared to count. Rowan took control again, leaning forward, elbows on the table. The story goes that those gold eagles were never recovered, and there are folks who swear they've seen glimpses of those exact mint marks turn up here in Peacehaven Fork. So we decided to investigate. Harriet set down her spoon and folded her hands over her apron. I can't say I've seen any gold eagles, Mr. Delgado, but you're welcome to look around if that eases your mind. I'm sure you'll find nothing but the usual items a widow keeps. Her tone remained soft, but Harriet's eyes carried a hidden challenge. Mace Delgado's attention shifted to Anna. And who are you, Miss Widow Welburn's hired help? Anna met his gaze without flinching. I'm her niece, Anna Morley. Been here a year or so, taking care of the chores an older lady might find difficult. There a problem with that? Mace shrugged. Just curious. His gaze lingered, making Anna want to turn away, but she held eye contact. Harriet had drilled into her the importance of not showing the slightest sign of weakness. Outside, the sound of footsteps alerted Harriet that Toby Delgado had indeed been circling around. He appeared in the doorway, boyish features flushed with excitement or tension. He couldn't have been older than 22 or 23. Rowan, he said, ignoring Harriet and Anna, the barn. We got to look at that barn. The abruptness in Toby's voice raised Harriet's hackles. She shot Anna a glance, and Anna shifted her stance reflexively, reaching for the rifle set against the wall. Meanwhile, Rowan stood adjusting his hat. Mrs. Welburn, I hope you don't mind. My brothers get a bit overzealous when they suspect something unusual. Toby, calm down. Toby paid no heed. I tell you, Rowan, there's something off about that barn's rear wall. I traced the beams. The spacing isn't right. He scratched his head as though perplexed, but Harriet recognized the glint in his eye. Toby had found a clue, and that put all of them on the edge of confrontation. Harriet let out a small laugh, injecting a grandmotherly scolding tone. Young man, that barn's older than I am. My husband did some odd construction in his day. Might be some hidden compartments for storing feed or tools. As she spoke, she placed the tray on the table, revealing nothing but her calm expression. But inwardly, Harriet evaluated how close the men were to drawing their weapons and how soon she might need to produce the small revolver in her apron pocket. Rowan Delgado narrowed his eyes. Maybe we should check it just to be certain we're not missing anything, or that you're not hiding anything. His voice was civil, but Harriet caught the challenge beneath it. This was a man used to pressing for advantage. Without turning to Anna, Harriet said, Dear, why don't you show them the barn? They seemed keen to explore. Anna's grip tightened on the rifle. She couldn't refuse, not without admitting they had something to hide. Of course, she murmured. Gentlemen, follow me. She managed a passable attempt at a cordial smile, stepping onto the porch and heading toward the barn with Toby and Mace in tow, both men on alert. Jeb Delgado hung back in the house, presumably to keep an eye on Harriet, while Rowan and Dylan moved to the porch, dividing themselves to maintain coverage. In the sudden quiet, Harriet remained seated old bones, perched on the edge of her chair, as Jeb Delgado stood across the small table. He looked her over with open skepticism. You're not nearly as jumpy as most folks I've met in this territory, ma'am. You sure you're just a widow? Harriet tried her best to look affronted and weary. What else would I be? A farmer, a homesteader, a mother before my children passed of fever. God rest their souls. I've not been anything exciting in my life, sir. She let her shoulders slump, a small performance of grief or sadness, but Jeb wasn't appeased. His thick arms were crossed and he scowled at her, the way a bison might glare at a predator trying to separate it from the herd. We'll see, he rumbled. Rowan's nose doesn't lie. Neither does Toby's. Harriet looked out the doorway, mentally picturing Anna guiding Toby and Mace into the barn. She knew that if they discovered the reinforced compartments, her carefully maintained facade would crack. In Harriet's decades of living under a new name, no visitors had made it this far into her private domain without some orchestrated hospitality to misdirect them. Now she braced for the moment that might force her hand. She gave Jeb a weak smile. Well, I've nothing to hide. Perhaps Toby will find that the spacing of the beams is just my late husband's eccentric carpentry. If it helps, I can tell him that we reinforced a section after a tornado took part of the barn's roof off some years ago. That might explain the unusual alignment. Jeb grunted, not quite convinced. Harriet's eyes drifted to the pistol in her apron pocket, thinking, I have lived too long to be undone by 4 or 5 men half my age. She wondered what Rowan Delgado's next move would be if Toby confirmed the barn had more sophisticated alterations than Harriet was letting on. Meanwhile, inside the barn, Anna led Toby and Mace through the dimly lit interior. The air smelled of hay, aged wood, and the faint odor of horse sweat. Rays of sunlight slid through narrow gaps in the walls, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the gloom. Anna walked confidently along the row of stalls, pointing to feed bins and storage shelves, with forced casualness. She was painfully aware that Toby Delgado's curiosity had been piqued. He tapped on wooden beams as if searching for hollow spaces. Mace Delgado, the taller of the two, kept glancing up toward the loft. You store hay up there? He asked. We do. Anna replied. Sometimes we have to keep the bales dry when the winter storms roll in. It's sturdy enough, I assure you. Toby, less polite, banged on the rear planks. They're double-layered. Why double up barn walls unless you're hiding something? Anna shrugged, though her insides were roiling. We once had a problem with wolves reinforced the back so they couldn't chew or dig through. My aunt insisted on it. She sounded unconvincing, even to her own ears. The men exchanged glances. Then Toby spotted the nearly invisible hinges Harriet had painstakingly concealed beneath a layer of old paint. Here, Mace. See this? He ran his finger along the edge. There's a hidden door here, or a compartment. Bet it's where they keep that rumored gold. Anna's heart thudded. She had to stall or divert. I wouldn't open that if I were you, she said quickly, stepping forward. We've had trouble with rotted beams could collapse. But Toby shook her off, excitement boiling. Listen, Missy, I'm not here to take your word for it. He gave the plank a good shove. The hidden door didn't budge. Harriet had designed it with an internal lock that could only be opened by removing specific nails along the top crossbeam. Anna swallowed a surge of relief, but also recognized the situation had escalated. Toby's brow furrowed and Mace pressed an ear to the wood. Empty, Mace declared after a moment. But you're right, it's definitely hollow behind there. Toby turned to Anna. So what's behind that wall? A secret stash. Anna forced a laugh. Just an old root cellar boarded up years ago. We had a problem with flooding, so we sealed it off. My aunt hasn't been able to fix it on her own. Mace nodded thoughtfully, but Toby remained skeptical. He was about to pry at the hinges when a loud crack sounded from somewhere toward the front of the barn, a shelf or a beam shifting. Spooked, Toby whipped his head around, and Anna seized that brief instant to step behind a support post. She raised her rifle, letting it rest casually against her leg, but angled so that if Toby or Mace made a sudden move, she could bring it up quickly. In that moment of tension, they all heard the echo of Jeb's harsh laugh from the house, carrying on the still air. Anna suspected Harriet was playing her role, well distracting the other brothers just long enough for Anna to handle Toby, and Mace. Anna's voice, when she finally spoke, was calm but firm. Look, no one's lying here. My aunt's an old woman. If she did stash gold, don't you think she'd have put it somewhere more secure than a barn that can be pried open? Toby hesitated, thinking it over. Well, you said it yourself, it's sealed. That's only because the old root cellar collapsed. Anna lied. You break that open, you might take the entire barn down. Are you so desperate to see a worthless hole in the ground that you'll risk my livestock? Mace studied Anna's face. He was clearly uncertain whether to believe her. Toby, on the other hand, had that fervent glimmer in his eyes, like someone who, once convinced there's treasure to be found, refuses all contrary evidence. But for the moment, Toby seemed to weigh the risk to their bigger plan. If they brought the barn down on themselves, they'd gain nothing. Back in the house, Harriet calmly poured more lemonade, aware that tension was building outside Rowan. Delgado had stepped onto the porch, presumably to keep watch, while Dylan Delgado hovered near Harriet in the main room. Jeb Delgado remained near the kitchen doorway. Arms folded and scowl fixed, Harriet's gaze flicked from Dylan's finely tailored vest, surprisingly upscale for a frontier rider, to Jeb's heavily worn boots and dusty attire. She deduced that Dylan was the smooth talker, the man who scouted towns under a respectable guise. Jeb was likely the muscle Rowan, the cunning leader. Toby, the eager pup, and Mace the sentinel, the one who checked details others missed. If Harriet needed more proof that these men were trouble, their dynamic provided it. They were well organized, each fulfilling a distinct role. In Harriet's earlier life, her gang had similarly specialized. She recognized the pattern, a carefully chosen team that compensated for each other's weaknesses. Underestimating them would be a grave mistake. Still feigning feebleness, Harriet inquired softly, "Would you like more coffee? I could heat some, if you prefer." Dylan Delgado gave a thin smile. "I'm just fine, ma'am." He studied her with a gaze that felt cold. "But maybe you can help us out. Word in these parts says you have relatives in Montana that you've received gold coins in the mail every so often." Harriet arched her eyebrows. "Gold coins, you say? Must be talking about someone else. I'm sure I've received packages, some tea and a locket from my sister a year back, but never gold." She added a small laugh as though the thought were absurd. "I'm a plain widow from the porch." Rowan called in Dylan. "Come here a minute." Dylan excused himself, leaving Harriet alone with Jeb, who eyed her suspiciously. She heard low voices on the porch, Rowan apparently filling Dylan in on something. Harriet suspected Toby's findings in the barn might be fueling their conversation. Suddenly, Jeb slammed his fist on the table, causing Harriet to jump. "Enough with the pretense," he growled. "If you've got nothing to hide, you won't mind us tearing that barn apart, right?" Harriet exhaled slowly. Her mind raced. She had orchestrated 100 illusions in her day. But if the Delgado brothers decided to rummage, they would find the structural reinforcements and possibly the hidden compartments where Harriet stored the old keepsakes and her old wanted posters. More dangerously, they might discover her stashed rifle ammunition. Harriet's heart hammered with the realization that confrontation was now inevitable. She forced a weak smile. "I'd rather you not destroy my barn, sir. It's the only one I've got." Jeb stared at her for a long second. Then, as if making a decision, he turned and yelled, "Rowan, are we just going to stand around or do something about this?" Harriet's eyes darted to the front window. She saw Rowan re-entering the house, Dylan trailing behind. They seemed to carry an air of finality. Rowan's face was set, and Harriet had seen that look before. Resolve shadowed by a hint of greed. She braced herself. Rowan Delgado drew close. "Ma'am," he began in a smooth tone that belied the threat. "We're at a crossroads. We believe you might have knowledge, maybe even possession of certain gold coins from years back. If you hand them over, we'll leave you be. No harm done." "And if I don't have them?" Harriet asked, voice as brittle as old parchment. Rowan shrugged. "Then we'll have to search every corner of your property until we're satisfied." Paragraph 7, Part 1. Harriet stood her knees, protesting, the lines on her face deepening. She let her voice tremble. I'm not stopping you from looking, but I won't stand for wanton destruction. If you men are so convinced, do your searching, but you'll find nothing of real value." Rowan flashed a grin. "We'll see about that, Mrs. Welburn." He motioned for Jeb and Dylan to follow him back outside, probably to coordinate with Toby and Mace. Harriet suspected they would converge on the barn. She had to make a decision fast. Anna or Harriet could pick them off from the hayloft vantage if necessary, but Harriet disliked that thought. She had spent years avoiding needless bloodshed, and the neighbors in Peacehaven Fork, while they might not come running to her rescue, would certainly get curious about multiple gunshots. Harriet did not want a vigilante group or the local sheriff investigating. She glanced out the window and spied the men gathering near the barn door. Toby was excitedly pointing. Rowan and Dylan leaned in to see. In her mind, Harriet's old instincts roared to life. She remembered the night her gang had outmaneuvered a cavalry detachment in a box canyon. She remembered orchestrating that famed train heist where no one even realized they'd been robbed until the locomotive reached its next station. She recalled the surge of triumph that came from outwitting men who believed they were unstoppable. Now her farmland was her fortress. She just needed to decide how far to push these intruders before they forced her hand. Jeb Delgado lingered near the porch steps, eyeing Harriet through the open doorway. She gave him a faint nod as though to say, "Go on, have your look." Then, gathering her strength, Harriet made her way to the back room to fetch something more formidable than a quilting needle. She slipped into the narrow hallway and pulled aside a section of wall paneling, revealing a hidden recess. Inside lay a well-oiled Spencer carbine modified for her arthritic hands to manage the recoil. Harriet lifted the weapon, testing its weight. The carbine's wooden stock was scratched and worn, bearing memories of the life Harriet had tried to leave behind. Stepping quietly, Harriet returned to the main room. Through the open doorway, she saw Anna standing a few yards from the barn, her rifle in the crook of her arm. The Delgado brothers formed a knot at the barn entrance, Toby pointing animatedly at the suspicious wall. Rowan stood slightly apart, scanning the area. Harriet knew that if Rowan spotted her with the Spencer, he'd react instantly. But Harriet had the advantage of surprise. No one expected an elderly widow to come out shooting. Taking a deep breath, Harriet recalled a lesson she had once given to a young outlaw in her old gang. The difference between living and dying out here often comes down to who seizes the moment. Hesitation kills. She had taught that to countless recruits. Now, ironically, she found herself in the same predicament, on the verge of deciding whether to fire the first shot or to attempt one last negotiation. A wave of resolve coursed through her. She didn't want to kill anyone, not unless they forced her hand. If the Delgados insisted on searching, perhaps Harriet and Anna could orchestrate a diversion that would keep them from fully discovering the secret compartments. Harriet eyed the gloom of approaching storm clouds on the horizon, a small cluster of gray that might bring a downpour. Storms move fast in these parts. Could she use nature's unpredictability to her advantage? Harriet stepped onto the porch, the Spencer hidden behind her shawl. Jeb Delgado, who had been looking off to the side, turned at the faint sound of the floorboards squeaking. She gave him a benign smile. "Is the barn to your liking, gentlemen?" she called, summoning a tone of mild sarcasm. Toby whipped around, brandishing a crowbar he must have retrieved from somewhere. "We're going to open that blasted wall, ma'am," he shouted, voice trembling with excitement. Anna's posture stiffened. Harriet could see the younger woman, pivot rifle now raised slightly. This was the tipping point. If Toby pried that door open, they'd see the compartments Harriet used for stashing supplies and, more incriminatingly, keepsakes from her old life. Rowan Delgado stepped forward. "We appreciate your hospitality, Mrs. Welburn, but it seems we're at odds. You say you have nothing to hide. My brother Toby claims there's a hidden space in your barn. Let us see for ourselves if it's empty. No harm done." His voice was calm, but Harriet sensed the unwavering greed behind it. The Delgados had come too far to back down now. Harriet tightened her grip on the Spencer, still concealed beneath the shawl. She forced a cracked lip smile. "Don't break my barn, son. You'll pay for every plank you ruin." The quiet threat in her tone might have been dismissed by a less observant man, but Rowan's eyes narrowed. He surveyed Harriet's posture, no longer quite so bent, and the determination in her gaze. "You're awfully protective for a widow who claims to have no secrets. Dylan remarked from behind Rowan's shoulder. Anna shifted her weight finger near the trigger of her rifle. Harriet could almost hear the younger woman's heartbeat, or maybe it was her own. Toby lifted the crowbar, pressing it against the seam of the barn planks. Jeb, the brute of the bunch, stood off to the side, arms folded as if daring Harriet to stop them. Mace Delgado said nothing, but Harriet noticed his stance was balanced on the balls of his feet, ready to draw if need be. Time slowed for Harriet. Memories unspooled in her mind. Nights riding under moonlight train whistles echoing across dark plains. The shouts of Pinkerton detectives on her trail, and the final confrontation at Mesa Falls that led the world to believe Harriet Galloway was dead. She'd walked away from that life battered but unbowed. Now it all threatened to unravel because a handful of men got wind of rumored gold. At last Harriet spoke. Stop! Her voice rang out, laden with authority that brooked no refusal. Toby paused mid-swing, the crowbar frozen against the barn's wood. Rowan's eyes flicked to Harriet's hidden arm. What for? Toby barked, but his brashness wavered. In a single motion, Harriet flung the shawl aside and leveled the Spencer carbine at Toby's chest. Anna raised her own rifle, covering Mace. The orchard behind the barn lay silent, the chirping of birds suddenly absent, as if nature itself held its breath. The men stiffened, each second pregnant with the possibility of gunfire. I said stop, Harriet repeated, her voice cold enough to send a chill up Toby's spine. No one pries open my barn unless I say so. For a moment Toby seemed ready to test her, but Rowan, quick to read the situation, raised a hand. Now, ma'am, let's keep this civilized, Rowan said, though Harriet caught the fury flickering in his eyes. He looked at his brothers, instructing them silently to hold their ground. None of them lowered their hands to their holsters, but Harriet noticed Jeb's fingers twitch in that direction. She was acutely aware that if even one Delgado decided to draw gunfire, would erupt in an instant. I don't want blood on my property, Harriet continued, voice steady, but I won't be robbed or bullied. I'm an old woman, yes, but I've learned enough in my life to keep trouble from making itself at home here. You wanted to know if I'm hiding something. Well, now you know I hide at least one skill, how to aim a rifle. Anna, her own weapon locked on. Mace added quietly, we've got the drop on you. You try anything, you'll be picking lead from your hides. She glanced at Harriet. You good? Harriet gave a single nod. I'm fine, dear. Let's see if these gentlemen can't be reasoned with. Rowan kept his hands visible, attempting a soothing grin. All right, all right. Let's not be hasty. Nobody wants a shootout. We'll put aside the crowbar, but we do have some questions. See, you're not just any widow, Mrs. Welburn. You move like someone who's handled a gun, and your barn is built like a fortress. Is that a crime? Harriet demanded, aiming the Spencer unwaveringly. I've lived alone for years, Mr. Delgado. My husband served in the war, taught me to defend myself. This is dangerous country. I did what I had to do to keep safe. She carefully controlled her breathing to maintain the facade of plausible explanation. Toby, unnerved by the Spencer barrel inches from his chest, tossed the crowbar aside with a clank. Dylan, standing a few paces behind Rowan, kept his posture casual, but Harriet suspected he was ready to draw. In a way, Harriet understood the Delgados. If you live by the law of the gun, you're always ready for violence. Rowan nodded. All right, let's talk. Suppose we leave the barn alone for now. Suppose we step back inside, we all sit down, and you tell us how a kindly widow came to be so adept with that big old rifle. His eyes flicked to the barn, then to Harriet. She recognized the tactic, keep her talking, distract her, find an opening. Harriet swallowed hard. She wasn't about to let them ransack her place, but she also didn't relish the idea of mowing down 5 men in her yard. The echoes of gunshots would carry, questions would arise, not to mention the moral weight Harriet still carried from her younger days. Fine, she said, but you keep your hands where I can see them. All of you. She gestured with the rifle, and the group moved slowly toward the house. Anna fell in behind them, ensuring no Delgado brother tried a sudden move. They trudged across the dusty yard, tension thick as a noose. Harriet's eyes never left Rowan, who seemed the type to attempt a last-second trick. Once inside, Harriet directed them to sit at the table. Tie them, she told Anna, wrist to wrist and ankles to the chair legs. Rowan's mouth tightened into a line, but he complied without a fight, at least for the moment. Toby glowered at Harriet, mumbling about how they'd regret this. but Harriet ignored him, letting Anna do her work. When the brothers were bound, Harriet set the Spencer in the corner out of their reach, but close enough for her to grab. She pulled up a chair, the old wooden legs scraping on the floor. For a moment, nobody spoke. The Delgado men shifted in their bonds, fuming while Harriet and Anna assessed them. Finally, Rowan exhaled. All right, you've got the upper hand for now. We came here for gold. Let's cut to the chase. Are you or are you not in possession of coins stolen from a Western Union transport nearly 2 decades ago? Harriet's lips tightened. She recognized the reference, the Western Union Express heist that had once been attributed to an outlaw known as Scarlet Harriet Galloway. Ironically, Harriet had orchestrated that robbery with military precision, but the story swirling around was full of misconceptions. And if I say I've never heard of such a thing? Harriet asked coolly. Rowan shrugged. Then you're lying, because any old woman who's built a barn like a fortress and can handle a rifle that well isn't just crocheting quilts all day. I think you're not who you claim to be. Anna stood arms folded near the kitchen fireplace. She looked from Harriet to Rowan, uncertain how much Harriet intended to reveal. Harriet sighed and let a long moment pass. The Delgado men stared, tension coiled in every muscle. Outside, a faint rumble of thunder teased from distant clouds, heralding a possible evening storm. You men, sure you want to hear my life story? Harriet said at last, voice tinged with a subtle challenge. Sometimes it's safer not knowing who you've offended. Toby snorted. If you were just some farmhand's widow, we'd have left you alone. But our sources say a portion of those stolen coins found their way to Peace Haven Fork, and your place fits the description. We came for gold, and it's not personal, but we don't mind it becoming personal. If you keep lying to us, Jeb, who had thus far spoken, little glowered at Harriet. Just give us the loot, lady, or we'll tear this place apart. I don't care how many rifles you got stashed. Harriet suppressed the urge to roll her eyes. This was precisely the attitude she loathed, men who believed force could solve all problems. She turned to Anna. Would you fetch me that small wooden box in the cupboard? Anna hesitated, but upon catching Harriet's subtle nod, she reached into the cupboard, withdrawing a small carved box. Harriet placed it on the table. The Delgado men watched hungrily. Harriet flipped open the lid, revealing some old photographs, a tarnished brooch, and a few battered coins. Silver, not gold. This, Harriet said, is my personal keepsake box. It's all that remains of my family. You can see nothing worth a fortune here. If I had heaps of gold, don't you think I'd have a grander house or nicer clothes? Rowan stared at the contents, his frustration mounting. Don't try to fool us. Stories say the woman who took those gold eagles stashed them for years, living modestly to avoid suspicion. Harriet snapped the box shut. The reference was too close for comfort. She inhaled, glancing at Anna. The younger woman's expression signaled, "They're not going to drop this." Harriet rose from her chair, pacing in front of the table. Outside, the thunder rumbled louder. Maybe the approaching storm would buy them some time or obscure any gunshots. The men watched Harriet with barely concealed aggression. Bound or not, the Delgado brothers were still dangerous. Harriet's mind flicked to the short dagger hidden at her ankle and the various vantage points in the house. She was running out of illusions. At length, Harriet spoke, her voice low. You want the truth, all right. Yes, I know about the Western Union heist. I heard the tales like everyone else. They say a woman named Scarlet Harriet Galloway masterminded it. She was the terror of half the territory. Never caught, presumed dead after some shootout. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Do I look like such a woman to you? Dylan Delgado studied her intently. Eyes narrow. People change. There's dye for hair. There's the passing of years. A legend who was, 30 or so, then could be near 60 now. That lines up with your age if you're not that outlaw. Prove it. Harriet gave a dry laugh. How does one prove they're not someone? Paragraph 11, Part 1. A flash of lightning outside cast the interior in stark relief. Rain began to patter against the roof, the storm having crept closer with each passing minute. Harriet welcomed the possibility of a downpour. The hiss of rain could cover certain sounds if things escalated to violence. At the same time, it would muddy the roads, possibly preventing the Delgados from making a swift escape. She approached Jeb, who sat glaring at her from his chair. You all are so certain I've got gold stashed away. Yet you see how I live, no fancy furnishings, no outward signs of wealth. Let me ask you, do you truly believe a cunning outlaw who stole thousands in gold would settle in a rickety house with a single barn? Rowan cut in. It's a perfect cover. A smirk crossed Harriet's face before she could stop it. Indeed it might be, she conceded. She considered dropping the charade altogether, revealing that Harriet Welburn was none other than Scarlet Harriet Galloway. But once that confession was out, there would be no going back. Could she trust these men not to spread word that the once-feared outlaw queen was still alive and well in Peacehaven Fork? Unlikely. Anna spoke up from the corner, voice tense. So what's your plan, Mr. Delgado? Hold us hostage until you tear down every wall to find treasure that isn't here. Rowan's gaze flicked from Harriet to Anna. If that's what it takes, though I'd prefer a more civilized arrangement, if the gold is indeed here, better to hand it over quietly. Harriet paused in front of Dylan, whose bonds were well secured. What if I told you I do have some gold coins, but not from any Western Union heist? Suppose my husband collected them back in the war. Suppose they're minted differently, maybe the same year, but acquired legitimately. Dylan's lip curled. Then we'd examine them, and if they match the stolen lot's mint marks, we'll know you're lying. In the hush that followed, Harriet heard the rain intensify. A jagged line of lightning illuminated the brothers' faces, each wearing a different shade of conviction or fear. Toby looked nervous, Mace contemplative, Jeb angry, and Dylan scornful. Rowan remained the enigma, a calm exterior that might burst with violence if triggered. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling a loose shutter. Harriet decided that time was no longer on her side. She squared her shoulders and gave Anna a sidelong look. Take the rifle and watch them, she instructed. I'll be back before Rowan could protest. Harriet disappeared through a side door. Her steps echoed in the hallway as she approached a concealed panel near the floor. This was a gamble if she brought out even a few of the gold coins she'd once used to fund her new life. The Delgado brothers would be certain to identify them as part of the rumored stash. But if Harriet refused, they'd remain belligerent, possibly force a violent confrontation. Kneeling, Harriet pried up a loose board and retrieved a small leather pouch. Within lay a handful of gold coins minted in the 1870s, the same coins that had financed Harriet's flight from her old life. She handled them with a mix of reverence and regret, remembering her old gang members, remembering the illusions of vengeance that had driven her to take from railroad barons and unscrupulous banks. She replaced the board, took a steadying breath, and returned to the main room. All five brothers looked up as she re-entered the storm raging outside. Now Harriet set the pouch on the table. Fine, she said, ignoring Anna's worried expression. Here's a sampling of coins my husband left me. If this is what you've come for, take a look. Her voice had gone cold, resigning herself to the next stage of this perilous dance. Rowan nodded to Dylan, who leaned forward, bound hands making the motion awkward. He managed to tip the coins onto the table. The flickering lamplight revealing their gleaming surfaces, Toby's eyes went wide. Jeb leaned in closer, and Mace let out a low whistle. Dylan carefully nudged one coin around, examining the mint date. 1874, he read, then picked another. 1876, he exhaled. They look a lot like Western Union coins. Rowan, the next breath Harriet took, felt like 1,000 pounds on her chest. She wondered if this was the moment her carefully spun life would be torn apart. Rain pelted the windows, thunder rumbled, and the Delgado brothers stared at Harriet with renewed intensity. Lightning flared outside, casting jagged shadows across the farmhouse walls, and thunder followed with a rolling crash that made the floorboards tremble. The storm had intensified faster than Harriet expected, and in the flickering lamplight, the gold coins on the table glowed with a spectral luster. All five Delgado brothers seemed mesmerized by the sight, even though their hands remained bound, and they were at the mercy of Harriet and Anna. Rowan Delgado spoke first, voice thick with both suspicion and greed. So, Mrs. Welburn, you expect us to believe your late husband simply acquired these coins as a collector's fancy? He tried to sound casual, but his eyes flashed with triumph. Finding minted gold from the 1870s in an old widow's possession was precisely the lead the Delgados had been chasing. Harriet forced a thin smile. That's what I'm telling you. No more, no less. You can check the mint marks if you want, but that's the story. She dared not say more. She knew the old Western Union coins had certain distinctive markings. ones that Pinkerton detectives had used in vain to track them through saloons and trading posts across the territory. Harriet suspected Rowan and his brothers either had references to confirm these were the stolen eagles, or at the very least enough knowledge to sense they'd struck gold. Anna hovered by the door, rifle raised. Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 impatient fingers. The tension in the room nearly crackled with the storm. Harriet observed each man's expression: Toby's excitement, Jeb's simmering anger, Dylan's calculating stare, Mace's quiet watchfulness, and Rowan's unwavering sense of control. Finally, Toby blurted out what was likely on all their minds. "This proves it, doesn't it, Rowan? She's got to be that outlaw, or she's connected at least." He jerked against his bonds. "Untie me, let me see that coin up close." "No," Harriet said sharply, pulling the pouch and its contents back from their reach. "Your word's no good to me right now. Not while you're brandishing crowbars and talking about tearing my barn apart. I haven't decided what to do with you." Yet Rowan's gaze flicked to Harriet's face. "You haven't decided what to do with us, ma'am. We might be tied, but there are 5 of us and only 2 of you. You can't expect to keep us here indefinitely." Harriet let out a weary sigh. "That's true. My orchard is not a prison. But there's a storm outside, and your horses won't go far in this mud without risking a broken leg. Sheriff in town is away on business. That means we've got a bit of time to figure out a solution." She paused, letting her gaze settle on Toby. "A solution that doesn't end in violence. I hope I've killed enough men in my youth to last a lifetime." The slip was deliberate, an admission that Harriet had indeed taken lives, if only to underscore she was not bluffing about lethal force. The Delgado brothers exchanged looks, each reading into Harriet's statement. Toby swallowed hard while Jeb sneered. Dylan arched a brow as though Harriet's words merely confirmed what he already suspected. Rowan, however, remained composed, his mind clearly working through possible angles. "I'm not your enemy," Rowan, Harriet said, surprising herself at the calm in her voice. "But you and your brothers chose a bad path by trying to rob an old widow. If you'd asked politely, maybe I'd have shown you hospitality, even helped you make an honest living. But you started off on the wrong foot." Anna, never lowering the rifle, added, "And we'll finish this on our terms, not yours. The question is, how do you want to walk away from here? Or do you prefer to limp?" A flash of annoyance crossed Rowan's face. "All right," he said slowly. "So you've got the advantage now. But as soon as we're free," Harriet cut him off. "That's up to you, because there's a world of difference between letting you go free with a handshake and burying 5 bodies in my orchard." She hated the ruthless edge in her own voice, but she knew it was necessary. Men like the Delgados only respected strength. Mace, who had been quietly observing, spoke up in a measured tone. "Surely there's a middle ground, Mrs. Welburn. None of us here wants a bloodbath." He glanced at Harriet's calloused hands. "I'm guessing you'd prefer to keep your orchard free of graves." Harriet offered a tight nod. "I would." Then she set the small pouch of coins aside away from the men. Her next words were carefully chosen. "Tell me, do you have a plan beyond this? If you were to find the gold, and I'm not saying there's more, what would you do? Ride off into the sunset, hide in Mexico? You must know the Pinkertons still poke around for those coins from time to time." Jeb let out a bark of laughter. "Pinkertons can poke around all they want. We've slipped from them before. We heard the rumor there's a tidy stash that could set us up for life if we manage it right." "Life?" Harriet repeated softly, letting the word hang. "It's a long time if you don't get caught. If you don't draw the attention of folks more dangerous than Pinkertons." Her mind drifted to memories of railroad tycoons who had private armies, men who made the Delgado gang look like amateurs. Harriet had seen how far those corporations would go to protect their assets. Anna cleared her throat. "So you're telling me you risked your lives sneaking out here on a rumor? You must be desperate." Toby bristled. "Not desperate, ambitious," Rowan exhaled. "We see the writing on the wall. The frontier's shutting down, laws creeping everywhere. And if we don't find a nest egg soon, we'll be pinned down or locked up. We want to start over somewhere else away from the bounty posters." Harriet regarded him thoughtfully. She heard a faint echo of her younger self in Rowan's words, the longing to escape the law's tightening noose and settle in a place of peace. Of course, Harriet's motivations had been more about vengeance and eventual survival, but she recognized the same longing for freedom. "It's not so simple," she said softly. Dylan's eyes flicked to Harriet. All right, wise old lady. Tell us how it's done. You must have your own story. How does a person walk away from the biggest robbery of their life and end up living incognito in a place like this? The question hung in the air like a spark in a tinderbox. Anna shifted her shoulders tense. Harriet realized that any deeper admission about her identity risked unraveling everything. Yet these men already suspected the truth. Perhaps it was time to share just enough to convince them that tangling with her wasn't wise. Rain pounded the roof so loud now it was difficult to hear anything else. Harriet sighed, letting her gaze drift to the streaked window. When a person does something big like robbing a major transport, they can't stay in the territory. Too many eyes, too many rumors. Some folks go south, some vanish into the mountains. Others stage a death, let the world think they perished. Toby's eyes widened. Are you saying that's what Scarlet Harriet did? Staged her own death. I heard rumors that she died in a hail of gunfire at Redcliffe Gulch. Harriet let out a small, mirthless laugh. Rumors often are wrong, Toby. People see what they want to see, a pile of bodies, smoke, and debris. If a clever outlaw planned it well, maybe she slipped away in the chaos. Rowan's stare became laser-focused. Then you believe Scarlet Harriet is alive? Harriet gave a non-committal shrug. Could be, if that's what you're hinting. Maybe she changed her name, found a quiet place. But if she did that, I doubt she'd welcome a band of outlaws showing up demanding her gold. The lamplight flickered, momentarily dimming, as if the storm outside threatened to knock out what meager lighting they had. The thunder rolled again, a drumbeat underscoring the tension within the farmhouse. Harriet took advantage of the hush that followed, considering her next move. She could continue the half-lies, half-truths indefinitely, or she could lay down the facts in a way that made the Delgado brothers realize how dangerous she truly was. She had to be careful, though. With 5 men tied up in her house claiming to be the legendary Scarlet Harriet might inflame their desperation. Some might see it as an opportunity to kidnap or ransom her for more wealth. Others might see it as a reason to kill her in revenge for a past slight. Harriet had long understood that knowledge could be weaponized. If these men truly believed she was that infamous outlaw, they might become either dangerously reckless or unexpectedly reverent, depending on their moral compass. Rowan broke the silence. All right. You've shown us a few coins that doesn't tell us if there's a hidden fortune or if you're connected to Scarlet Harriet. But let's assume you're telling the truth. You only have these few eagles left from your husband's estate. Then hand them over, let us go, and we'll trouble you no further. Anna's laughter was short and scornful. Oh, really? You show up on our doorstep, threaten us pry at our barn walls, then want us to trust that you'll leave if we just hand over everything of value? She shook her head. How stupid do you think we are? Rowan's jaw tightened. I'm trying to avoid bloodshed, and you think we aren't, Harriet shot back. If we wanted you dead, do you think you'd still be breathing now? You tried to break into my barn and we got the drop on you. Twice. She felt her pulse quicken, memories of past standoffs clouding her vision. Her younger self would have set an ambush, taken them all out at once. But Harriet was no longer that woman, or at least she tried not to be. Toby wriggled in his chair, frustration palpable. So what are we going to sit here all night? The storm's not letting up and we ain't getting any drier. Harriet arched an eyebrow. You'll remain my guest until I decide otherwise. Dylan, who had been scrutinizing Harriet, ventured. You said you'd killed enough men in your youth. That suggests you were more than just a farmhand's wife. And your defenses around this house suggest a mind for strategy. He nodded toward Anna. You even taught your niece how to handle that rifle like a professional. Doesn't quite add up to the story of a widow living off some orchard. Anna bristled knuckles, white around the gunstock. Harriet held up a hand. We're not here to share life stories. Let's just say the orchard has protected me for years, and I intend to keep it that way. She eyed Rowan. If you men are smart, you'll realize there's no fortune to be found, and leaving with your lives intact is the best outcome you can hope for. Jeb spat on the floor. Call us liars if you want, but we know there's a bigger stash. A handful of coins is just the tip of it. The old rumors talk about thousands in gold eagles. Harriet fought the urge to roll her eyes. Of course, rumors abounded that she had stolen up to 40,000 in gold from the Western Union Express. The actual sum had been slightly less, but it was still an enormous haul for that era. Harriet had distributed some shares to her old gang members before Gallcliff. She'd used the rest sparingly to finance her new life, paying off suspicious neighbors purchasing land under a false name. If the Delgados believed she had the entire stash locked away, they would never be satisfied with her partial denial. In a quiet voice, Harriet said, "Don't always believe the tall tales. Sometimes they're exaggerated to sell newspapers or dime novels. That's how legends get bigger than truth." Paragraph 4, Part 2. The storm outside surged as if nature itself was fueling the confrontation within the walls. Water dripped from the eaves, forming rivulets that traced patterns in the dirt. The orchard's trees rustled violently, their branches clawing at the dark sky. Harriet wondered fleetingly about the goats and chickens in the small pen out back. But she had more pressing concerns than wet livestock. At the moment, Anna walked a slow circuit behind the Tide brothers, ensuring each bond was still secure. Jeb glared at her over his shoulder, while Mace watched her intently. Rowan's eyes kept returning to Harriet, as though trying to dissect her every movement. Harriet recognized that if the brothers found an opening, they would use it. Toby was the first to break the tension again, his voice pitched with desperation. "Look, we need that gold, or at least a clue to where it's hidden. We heard it could be enough for us to buy land in the next territory, start anew." His words tumbled out, revealing more about the Delgado brothers' motivations than Harriet had gleaned thus far. They weren't just roving bandits looking for quick cash. They wanted an exit strategy from the outlaw life. Harriet studied Toby's earnest face. He couldn't be older than his early 20s, a boy playing at being a hardened criminal. Suddenly, she felt a flicker of pity. She had been about that age when she lost everything: her husband, her sense of security. That was before she'd transformed into Scarlet Harriet and written her story in bullets and blood. "You can still choose a different path," she said softly, surprising them all. Thunder drummed a steady cadence beyond the farmhouse walls, and flashes of lightning transformed the interior into a stage of stark illuminations and jittery shadows. The storm had settled, and seemingly determined to remain through the night. Inside the cramped kitchen, the 5 Delgado brothers sat tied to chairs, though their bonds, like the tension, were growing more strained by the minute. In front of them, Harriet Welburn and her companion, Anna Morley, kept watch. Harriet stood near the table, one hand resting on a small cloth pouch that contained a few gleaming gold coins from the 1870s. Anna positioned herself by the closed door, her rifle aimed steadily at the men. Moments earlier, Harriet had dropped enough hints to make it clear that she was no ordinary widow. The Delgado brothers, especially their leader Rowan, now stared at her with a mix of caution and grudging respect. The entire standoff felt suspended in time, every breath punctuated by the rattle of rain against the roof. One misstep, one flicker of impatience, and the night could descend into chaos. Toby Delgado, the youngest, looked torn between fear and excitement. He wanted that gold. Harriet could see it in his eyes, but the reality of 5 men bound at the mercy of 2 armed women was an unsettling twist on the usual order of things. Toby's face glistened with perspiration, and he kept swallowing hard as though trying to rid himself of the lump in his throat. Finally, Toby blurted, "You said you've killed enough men in your youth. That's not the talk of a simple orchard keeper." His voice wavered between bold accusation and a childish plea for explanation. His older brother Jeb cast him a warning glance, but Toby pressed on. "What's stopping you from killing us now? If you're half the legend, I think you are. Scarlet Harriet or not, why not end it here?" For a long moment, Harriet didn't answer. She simply stared at the coins spilled on the table, relics of a life she'd tried to bury. Each piece bore the battered edges of time. Each piece was also a silent witness to her past. What indeed, she thought, is stopping me from putting these fools 6 feet under? In her younger days, when her entire existence hinged on evading the law, she might have handled the Delgado brothers with brutal efficiency. But now she was older, wearier, more inclined to avoid violence. She turned her gaze on Toby, letting him see a spark of the iron will that once made her notorious. "I'm not that woman anymore," she said quietly. "You think legends are written in stone, but they're not. People change, or they try to." Her lips tightened, recalling the fleeting moments of happiness she found after abandoning the outlaw path. Even if she had to defend herself, Harriet no longer took pleasure in spilling blood. Anna cleared her throat, glancing between Harriet and Toby. "We didn't ask for this. You rode onto our land, you forced our hand. So if you're looking for a reason why nobody here is dead yet, you can start by looking at your own reflection. You're lucky, Mrs. Welburn has more mercy than most." She then moved rifle in hand to the window, pulling the curtain aside to peer out at the storm. Wind rattled the glass, and beyond it, darkness swallowed the orchard. At the table, Rowan Delgado's composure began to reassert itself. He surveyed Harriet with the narrow-eyed calculation of a gambler with a poor hand, but plenty of nerve. "If you truly want to avoid bloodshed, we can talk terms. But first we need a fair discussion." "Untie us and we'll have that talk," Harriet snorted. "Untie you so you can overpower us the first chance you get? I'm old, not stupid." Rowan's knuckles whitened as he tested the rope around his wrists. "Haven't we proved our willingness to talk by not tearing this place apart the moment we arrived? We could have shot our way in, grabbed what we wanted, and ridden off." In response, Harriet fixed him with a level stare. "And yet you're the ones tied up in my kitchen. Perhaps you overestimate your initial advantage." Her tone was as cold as the rain pounding the tin roof. Leaning forward, Dylan Delgado, who until now had quietly observed, spoke in a polished baritone. "Mrs. Welburn, or whatever your real name is, consider the bigger picture. If your goal is simply to remain hidden in Peacehaven Fork, you risk that secrecy every second you hold us here. People might notice we're missing. Eventually a search party could come." He paused, letting the implication settle. "Who knows what they'll find or what we might say if we get loose?" Anna's posture stiffened. She turned from the window. "Is that a threat?" Dylan offered a half-smile. "A reality the Delgado name carries weight. If we vanish, folks will ask questions. This territory isn't so lawless anymore, and some of our associates in other towns might send word. Then the local Sheriff Pinkerton agents, maybe even railroad detectives, will start sniffing around." A flash of lightning outside momentarily silhouetted Harriet against the gloom. She studied Dylan's face, handsome albeit marred by subtle lines of cunning. He was the talker of the group, clearly the one who negotiated in saloons or scouted a town's vulnerabilities. His logic was sound, and Harriet knew it. She had counted on the territory's vastness to absorb stray travelers, but letting 5 men disappear without a trace could indeed rouse unwanted attention. She exhaled slowly. "All right, let's say I set you free. What then? You ride off into the storm. Maybe lose some horses in the mud and limp to the next settlement. Are you promising to keep your mouth shut about me? Or this place?" Rowan shrugged an awkward movement, given the rope binding him to the chair. "That depends on whether you make it worth our while. We came for gold. Show us reason to believe there's no more than that pouch, and maybe we'll move on. Or if there is more, make us an offer. We're businessmen, ma'am, not monsters." Anna snorted. "You nearly broke into our barn and threatened us, but you're not monsters." Right Mace Delgado, who had remained mostly silent since being brought in, ran his tongue over dry lips. "Anna, is it? Some of us may have tempers," he said, glancing sidelong at Jeb. "But we're not out here to kill widows or nieces. We just want enough coin to secure our future. Then we can vanish as well, become ranchers or merchants, anything but outlaw scum." The clamor of rain intensified, water sluicing from the eaves in torrents. Harriet felt a pang of empathy she didn't want to acknowledge. She remembered that final night on the run before she faked her own death. How she too had yearned for a clean slate. A chance to live without scanning every ridgeline for lawmen or bounty hunters. "We'll talk," she said at last, "but I won't untie you." "Not yet." Rowan tilted his head in silent acceptance. "Fine, then talk." Harriet pulled out a chair and settled heavily into it, her bones protesting. She was grateful for the rush of cool air from the crack under the front door, as the storm had dropped the evening temperature. Resting her elbows on the table, she gazed at the Delgado brothers, her mind drifting to a time when she herself had assembled a motley crew of outcasts. They'd all been bound by necessity rather than a shared love of crime. In each of these brothers, she saw shadows of people she had known: the hot-headed enforcer, the shrewd negotiator, the loyal but uncertain newcomer. Her voice when she finally spoke held the weight of recollection. I once rode with a group of people who wanted exactly what you say you want. We weren't killers for sport. We saw a world stacked against honest folk, a system that let bankers, railroad bosses, and corrupt lawmen get fat while common families starved. Over time, we convinced ourselves we were balancing the scales by taking from those who exploited others. Jeb scoffed, unconvinced. Sounds like a fancy way of saying you robbed folks ignoring him. Harriet continued. Yes, we robbed, but we avoided bloodshed when possible. We studied train schedules, learned which banks financed the confiscation of homesteads and took from them. Even so, there were casualties because in the end, violence always catches up. She paused, her gaze drifting to a rivulet of rain trailing down the window. It's not a life I'd recommend to anyone. Anna stood near Harriet's chair, rifle still in hand. What Mrs. Welburn means, Anna added, is that there's a reason she's kept such a low profile, a reason she values her solitude and won't give it up for some misguided cause. She cast Harriet a sympathetic glance, her respect for the older woman evident. Toby Delgado leaned forward, eyes bright. Then you do know where that gold came from, those coins. You must have been involved somehow, if not directly. Then you were close to the ones who did it. Harriet's jaw tightened. Think what you will, but I'm telling you, a life of taking from others leads nowhere good. If you want to keep living, find an honest trade. It might not make you rich, but it won't get you hanged. Rowan studied Harriet in the dancing lamplight. That's the lecture of a reformed outlaw if I've ever heard one. I take it you're not going to show us any hidden chests of gold, no matter how we threaten or bargain. Harriet pressed her lips together in a hard line. She thought of the few precious coins still concealed in the barn's hidden compartments, as well as the ledger documenting her old robberies, and the coded references to stashed funds scattered across multiple territories. Over the years, she'd given away portions to families in need, bribed officials to maintain her cover, and lived simply so as not to draw attention. The legend of Scarlet Harriet Galloway might have boasted of grand fortunes, but the reality was more complicated and more modest. She exhaled, if there's more, I wouldn't show it to you. You'd never leave in peace, and if there isn't more, you'd call me a liar. She slid the pouch with the few coins back into a drawer. So believe what you want. The wind howled, sending a shudder through the house. Jeb jerked against his ropes, mumbling curses under his breath. Harriet stood pressing her hands against her lower back to ease the stiffness. Anna, I think it's time we feed the animals. The storm won't do them any kindness, Anna nodded, stepping away from the group. And while we're out, you boys can think about whether you want to keep testing my patience. Outside, the rain struck like icy needles against Harriet's face as she and Anna stepped onto the porch. The wind tugged at their clothing, and the orchard beyond the house rustled like a restless sea of branches. Lantern in one hand, Harriet led the way toward the small coop and goat pen. Despite her age, she moved with sure-footed caution, mindful of slick mud that could topple her. Behind her, Anna trudged, rifle slung across her back for now, though she remained watchful in case any of the Delgado brothers had managed to slip free and followed them outside. When they reached the goat pen, Harriet carefully unlatched the gate. A single skittish nanny goat bleated in the corner, her kid huddled against the fence. Rain-soaked straw squelched underfoot as Harriet placed extra hay in their trough, murmuring soft words to calm them. Meanwhile, Anna knelt to check for any damage to the fence. High winds sometimes broke loose boards. Harriet, Anna said quietly, glancing over her shoulder. What's our long game here? Sooner or later, they'll figure a way out, or the storm will pass and they'll try something. Are we just waiting for them to regain enough energy to stage a bigger fight? Harriet wiped rain from her brow. I'm trying to give them a chance to see reason, she murmured. They're not ordinary brigands. They want a way out. But the minute they think I have more gold, they'll keep pushing. She paused, weighing her words carefully. And if we kill them or turn them into the sheriff, we invite questions about how 2 women subdued 5 men and where we got any gold at all. Anna nodded grimly, so releasing them with some sort of deal might be the only path that doesn't lead to a bigger mess. Lightning flashed and a thunderclap rattled the air. Harriet steadied herself against the fence, the brief burst of light revealing the orchard's twisting rows of trees, their fruit not yet ripe. The orchard felt like a loyal companion in Harriet's seclusion, a living testament to her labor and longing for a peaceful life. That life was now under dire threat from the Delgado brothers, they moved on to the chicken coop. Harriet lifting the lantern high to check on the hens. Most had huddled away from the drafts, clucking nervously at the storm. Anna scattered some feed, though the birds were too frightened to peck for more than a moment. The world was a swirl of gray gloom and relentless rain. After finishing with the animals, they stood under the lean-to that sheltered the wagon Harriet used for the occasional trip into town. Rain hammered the tin roof overhead, drowning out any distant sounds. "We should head back," Harriet said, nodding toward the house. "I don't want to leave them alone long enough to figure out how to untie themselves." Anna hesitated, glancing at Harriet with concern. "If this gets ugly, I won't hesitate to use my rifle." Harriet gripped Anna's shoulder. "I know, but let's see if we can avoid that. I've lived too many years with blood on my hands. I'd rather not add more." They trudged back through the muck lantern, swinging the wind ripping at their coats. As they neared the porch, Harriet's heart gave a small jump. One of the Delgado brothers, Dylan, she thought stood just outside the door, partially untied ropes dangling from his wrists. He lifted his hands in mock surrender at the sight of their rifles. Harriet raised the lantern, its weak glow illuminating Dylan's soaked clothing. Rain dripped from his hair, and his breath puffed in the cold air. He made no immediate move to run or draw a weapon, likely because he had none. Anna, reacting in an instant, swung the rifle off her shoulder and aimed it squarely at his chest. "What do you think you're doing?" Harriet demanded, voice cutting through the storm's roar. "You best step back inside unless you want to freeze to death." Dylan offered a tight, humorless smile. "Sheriff's not in town, you said." "There's no one else around. Didn't see any neighbors running over to help you. I thought we could have a more private chat away from my brothers." Anna's finger twitched on the trigger. "Private chat?" "Yes," Dylan replied quietly. "I managed to wriggle out of the ropes. Rowan and the others are still tied. I slipped out before they noticed. Figured it might be my one chance to speak to you without all their eyes on me." Harriet narrowed her gaze. She couldn't tell if this was a ruse to lure them into an ambush. "What do you have to say that can't be said in front of your brothers?" Dylan took a cautious step forward, both hands still raised. "I'm the one who scouts new opportunities, collects the intelligence. I've been the one hearing tales about an older widow near Peacehaven Fork who might have a hoard of old gold. Half the rumors point to a bank or a wealthy rancher. The other half point to you. Rowan doesn't want to quit until we've uncovered the truth. But me, I can see when a job is turning sour." Lightning illuminated the yard for a split second, revealing the determined set of Dylan's jaw. "I want out," he said. "I wanted out even before we rode here. I'm done living on borrowed time. Toby's too green to make decisions. Jeb's too bloodthirsty, and Rowan can't let go of the idea that one big score will fix everything." He hesitated, glancing at Anna's rifle, then back at Harriet. "If you don't want trouble, maybe we can cut a deal. Let me slip away. When the storm dies down, I'll vanish. No one has to know you were the legendary outlaw behind this, and in return you give me enough gold to start a small life somewhere far from here." Harriet felt Anna shift beside her. The older woman let out a slow breath, scanning Dylan's face for signs of deceit. "You realize you're asking me to trust that you won't bring your brothers back or come after me with reinforcements?" "Why should I believe you? I know your secret," Dylan said simply. "Or at least, I'm close to it. If I wanted to expose you, I'd have done it already, but I don't want bounty hunters after me either. I just want to fade away before Rowan's obsession gets us all killed." Anna's rifle remained level. "This might be a trick to get us to lower our guard." Dylan raised his hands higher. "I'm unarmed. My best chance of surviving is your goodwill. If you say no, I'll slip back inside and pretend this conversation never happened until Rowan leads us to a bloody end." Harriet's thoughts churned. She was far too practiced in deception to take Dylan's words at face value. Yet something in his demeanor struck her as genuine, especially the way he referred to Toby as too green and Jeb as bloodthirsty. It aligned with Harriet's own observations of the Delgado family dynamic. Still, forging a deal with a single brother might fracture the gang further, making the situation even more volatile. The rain persisted, sheeting down, stinging Harriet's cheeks, A cold gust tugged at her coat, urging her to retreat inside. But Harriet needed clarity. "Let's say I do trust you for a moment," she said. "What exactly do you want?" Dylan licked the rain from his lips, squinting into the lantern light. "2 or 3 gold coins, enough to stake a claim or buy a small piece of land in the next territory. Then I'll be gone. I won't breathe a word about you or your orchard or how we were bested here." Anna snorted. "And how do we know you won't reappear with Pinkertons looking to collect a bounty on Harriet Galloway?" She deliberately used Harriet's old name to see how Dylan would react. He flinched, confirming that he suspected Harriet's full identity. "I don't want Pinkertons. I don't want any more trouble. I've spent a decade outrunning bounty posters with Rowan and Jeb. I can't do it anymore." He let out a small, hollow laugh. "Maybe I'm a coward, but I'd rather be a live coward than a dead outlaw hero." In some dime novel, Harriet studied his face, her old instincts evaluating every nuance, tonality, posture, expression. She noted the slump of his shoulders as though he carried a burden heavier than he'd anticipated. If his words were honest, Harriet couldn't entirely fault him. In another life, she might have done something similar, if only to find a patch of land where no one knew her name. A gust of wind drove freezing rain sideways, drenching them more. "We can't talk here," Harriet said at last. "Go back inside. Look like you're still tied if you can. This conversation remains between us. If you try anything—" She patted the Spencer carbine at her side. Dylan nodded. "I'll slip back in. The others will think I was trying to get free. If Rowan starts pressing, I'll stall him." Anna cast Harriet a skeptical glance as Dylan turned to re-enter the house. He jiggled the door latch, slid in, and closed it behind him quietly. For a moment, Harriet and Anna stood in the swirling wind, uncertain whether they had just taken the first step toward a solution or a deeper betrayal. "He might be lying," Anna said softly. Harriet nodded. "We keep him under watch either way, but if there's a chance to avoid a bloodbath by peeling off one brother, maybe it's worth trying. If we can't handle them collectively, perhaps we can break them apart. Dangle just enough coin to persuade each to scatter." Anna wiped the rain from her forehead, her hair plastered to her scalp. "I'll follow your lead. But Harriet, be careful. One miscalculation, and they'll burn this place to the ground." Harriet's mouth twisted in a grim line. She thought of her orchard, the trees she had nurtured from saplings, the barns she and a local carpenter had reinforced painstakingly. The small joys she found in quiet living. The Delgado brothers had already invaded the sanctum. Now they threatened the fragile peace Harriet had built. "I've lost one life already," she whispered. "I won't lose another." They headed back inside, boots leaving muddy prints on the wooden porch. The living room lantern flickered with the draft as Harriet and Anna closed the door behind them. Inside, the kitchen was dim, lit only by that single flame and the faint glow of lightning through the windows. The brothers, apparently still bound, looked up in unison as Harriet entered. Rowan Delgado's features were set in a mask of annoyance. "Taking your time, aren't you?" His gaze flicked to Dylan, who sat in his chair, wrists seemingly tied once more. Harriet's eyes flickered over the ropes. Dylan had done a believable job, making it look as if he were still restrained. "We have livestock to tend, storms or no storms," Harriet said curtly, "and we prefer to keep living animals over corpses." "Not that you'd understand," Toby bristled. "I thought you were leaving us in here to rot." Harriet ignored the jab and stepped closer to the brothers. The room reeked of damp wool and wood smoke from the fireplace, which Anna had stoked. Jeb tugged at his ropes, cursing under his breath. Mace sat quietly evaluating Harriet with steady eyes. Rowan, as always, looked ready to pounce on any sign of weakness. Anna stationed herself by the hearth, rifle resting on her arm. Harriet, gripping the back of a chair, regarded each brother in turn. "The storm's not letting up anytime soon. That means we have time for a civilized conversation, unless you'd like to keep testing me." Jeb spat on the floor near Harriet's boots. "Where's that conversation lead, old lady? You handing over the gold or not?" Anna stepped forward, muzzle swinging toward Jeb. "Watch your mouth." Harriet held up a hand, restraining Anna. "Let him speak. I've lived long enough not to get ruffled by words." She fixed Jeb with an even stare. "No, I'm not handing you everything I own. I've said it before. There isn't some massive stockpile waiting for you to dig up." Rowan let out a slow, measured breath. Then maybe we take what's here and leave. You have coins. We've seen them. How many more do you have tucked away? Not many, Harriet replied bluntly. Even if you took them all, it wouldn't buy you half the life you're imagining. Silence hovered, and the rain hissed on the rooftop. A lightning bolt seared the sky, followed by a deafening clap that made Toby flinch. Harriet sensed an almost claustrophobic dread settling over them. 5 criminals, 2 armed women, and a storm that barricaded them from the outside world. No one could leave comfortably without confronting the other. Dylan, playing his part, cleared his throat. Seems to me we might be better off coming to terms. We can't get far in this weather. She can't keep us prisoner forever. Maybe we do a trade. A few coins for our silence. We walk away, no questions asked. Rowan eyed his brother suspiciously, as though Dylan had overstepped. I don't recall making you the spokesman. Dylan shrugged. I'm just saying what's obvious. We can't strong-arm a woman who spent her life outsmarting folks. Can we? His eyes darted to Harriet, then away, subtly conveying a sense of reluctant respect. Harriet allowed a thin smile. The seeds of division were being planted. If I decided to part with some coins just enough so you could start fresh, would that truly satisfy you? She gave them a meaningful look. A handful of gold eagles might pay for a small place. You wouldn't be rich, but you wouldn't be wanted men either if you kept your heads down. Is that the life you want? Rowan tilted his head at Harriet as if weighing her offer. His brothers shifted in their chairs, exchanging uncertain glances. Toby's face bore a flicker of hope, and Mace narrowed his eyes thoughtfully. Jeb looked unconvinced, while Dylan, still playing his clandestine game, acted like he was just another brother feeling out the situation. I don't trust your numbers, Rowan said at last. You could give us a few coins that aren't enough to do anything, more than buy a month's worth of rations. Then we'd have spent all this effort for scraps. His voice turned sharp. We heard the rumor of thousands in stolen eagles. A few coins doesn't cut it. Harriet sighed, her hands curling into fists at her sides. The rumor you chase is just that, a rumor. I'm not carrying thousands. Most of it was. She caught herself before finishing was spent or hidden ages ago. Instead, she cleared her throat. Most of it never made its way here. Let's leave it at that. Jeb growled, wrestling with his ropes. Give us the bigger stash. Don't try to cheat us. Anna stepped forward, raising the rifle again. Keep your voice down, or I'll show you how well we handle cheaters around here. Enough, Harriet commanded, her voice slicing through the tension. If we're to negotiate, we do it calmly. Otherwise, this talk ends, and I'll leave you tied up until the sheriff returns. The mention of the sheriff cast a pall over the group. Rowan forced a thin smile. Fine, we'll listen, but let's talk real numbers. How many coins are you prepared to offer us? Thunder rolled again, and Harriet paced near the table, her silhouette dancing in the lantern glow. She was playing a dangerous game, appear too stingy, and the Delgados might gamble on violence, certain there was more to be found. Appear too generous, and they'd suspect she truly had a massive cache. Harriet glanced at Anna, who gave a slight shrug. They hadn't planned to negotiate in such detail. Harriet inhaled slowly, choosing her words. I can spare maybe 10 or 12 coins, enough for each brother to have 2 or 3 if you split it evenly. She gazed at Rowan. That's more than you'd get from robbing some unlucky traveler, and less attention-grabbing than a trunk filled with gold. Think about it, smaller amounts are easier to spend without raising suspicions. Rowan's jaw flexed. Harriet could almost see the gears turning in his head. 12 coins multiplied by a coin's potential value, perhaps $20 each by older standards, or possibly more to the right buyer. With prudent dealing, that could be a tidy sum, but would it satisfy him? Harriet doubted it. Toby looked tempted. We could head north, maybe buy a piece of land near the river. Jeb snorted. A piece of swamp, maybe. Mace rubbed at his beard, stubble contemplative. We'd have to be careful. If the Pinkertons get wind we're paying with old minted eagles, they'll trace it back. Dylan cut in smoothly. But it's doable if we spend them slowly, separate ways. Maybe better than staying on the run with nothing to show for it. Harriet studied the interplay. The men's opinions diverged, and that worked to her advantage. Or you can stay here until the sheriff arrives, in which case you'll face a cell or a noose. It's not a complicated choice. Lightning cracked overhead, followed by a sudden flicker in the lamp. For an instant, darkness claimed the room, and Harriet's breath caught. Then the flames steadied, casting everyone in a dim yellow glow. Beneath the thunder's after rumble, Rowan Delgado chuckled a low and humorless sound that set Harriet's nerves on edge. "So you're offering us a devil's bargain, a handful of coins, and your silence in exchange for ours," he said, nodding at Harriet's stony face. "But what if we decide you're lying, or you have more? Why shouldn't we push harder?" Harriet didn't blink. "Try it," she said calmly, "and see how many of you walk out alive." The statement was blunt, raw enough to remind the Delgados that Harriet had orchestrated their capture, and still had the upper hand and a rifle at the ready, provided a silent exclamation point to Harriet's threat. Despite Harriet's warning, Jeb sneered, baring yellowed teeth. "Might be worth the risk." Rowan turned sharply toward his brother. "Stop." He paused, then continued in a measured tone. "Let's say we accept the deal. 12 coins, enough for a fresh start if we're clever. We take them at dawn when the storm eases and we leave. But how do we know you won't come gunning for us later, or raise a posse to hunt us down?" Anna spoke, her voice laced with weary exasperation. "Why would we hunt you down if we're trying to get rid of you? You think we enjoy risking our lives?" Mace shrugged, or tried to, his movement constricted by ropes. "Hard to know who to trust in the West. Deals get broken all the time. We've had men promise safe passage, then set ambushes." Harriet's mouth tightened. A memory flashed of her old gang, negotiating a betrayal-laden truce with a railroad detective in an abandoned depot. It ended in a double cross from both sides. She understood the men's skepticism all too well. "Trust is a commodity I don't have in surplus," she said. "But I also know pointless killing brings attention, which is exactly what I'm avoiding. In that sense, you're safer trusting me than if I were some bloodthirsty vigilante." Rowan let out a bitter laugh. "You're not exactly Miss Generosity, though, are you?" "No," Harriet replied, "and that's why I'm still alive." Outside, the wind shrieked, shaking the shutters. The storm's fury had made time drag on each second, stretching into an anxious hush. Harriet's eyes flicked to the window. Still nothing but darkness and rain. Daybreak was hours away, but the eventual glow of dawn promised resolution. One way or another, Anna eased toward the doorway leading to the next room. "If you're agreeable to the deal, we'll secure you for the night, someplace safer for all of us. In the morning, if the weather allows, we'll give you the coins and you'll ride out." She glanced at Harriet Wright. Harriet nodded curtly. The plan mirrored what she'd been mulling over, contain the brothers, without inciting them to violence. Then send them away with just enough gold to ensure they didn't come back. It was a fraught gamble, but Harriet saw no better alternative. "Let's handle the details now. Then we can all get some rest," she said. "I've seen enough sunrises after a restless night in my time. I'd prefer at least a few hours of peace." Wariness radiated from each Delgado brother as Harriet and Anna directed them to a larger storage room adjoining the main kitchen. Heavy shelves lined the walls, stocked with preserved fruits, grains, and dried meats. A single lantern illuminated the cramped space. The air smelled of old wood vinegar and faint traces of kerosene. Rowan, Dylan, Jeb, Toby, and Mace filed in, still bound at the wrists and ankles. Though Harriet and Anna had partially loosened the ropes to allow limited movement, "Sit," Harriet ordered, pointing to a sturdy bench near the back of the room. "Try anything, and I'll forget my newfound mercy." The men lowered themselves onto the bench, the wood creaking under their weight. Toby's voice broke the tense quiet. "You said you'd let us go in the morning with a share of coins. We gave our word we wouldn't trash your barn or your house looking for more." Harriet leaned against a shelf, the Spencer carbine held casually but pointed downward. "Yes, and I expect you to keep that word. If you don't, I have enough loaded weapons stashed around here to ensure you never see that sunrise." A taut silence followed. Rain pattered against the single window set high in the wall. No more than a small pane for ventilation. Rowan watched Harriet, his eyes flicking to Anna occasionally, as though still astonished two women had outmaneuvered the Delgado gang. At length, Harriet addressed the group. "We'll bring in some blankets, keep a lantern lit so you're not in total darkness. Anna or I will be standing guard in shifts. By dawn, the storm should have eased. We'll settle up then." Jeb spat on the floor, evidently still furious. "You'd better keep your end of the bargain, lady." Anna's jaw tightened. You're in no position to make demands. Rowan waved a bound hand to calm Jeb. All right, we'll wait. But if the storm keeps raging, don't expect us to sit here another day. Fair enough, Harriet said. She walked to the door, then paused. And one more thing, do not try to slip out of those ropes again. Dylan. She let her gaze bore into him, knowing he'd sensed the warning beneath the words, that she was aware of his recent escape and their private conversation. If any of you men come wandering around the house in the dark, the next conversation will be bullet first talk. Later, Dylan stared back, face neutral, but Harriet caught the flash of understanding in his eyes. She might have a fragile alliance with him, but she wasn't about to let him roam freely. Slipping out into the hallway with Anna, Harriet shut the door behind them, sliding a makeshift wooden bar across it for extra security. The lamplight shining through the gap beneath the door flickered as the men settled inside. Harriet exhaled, feeling the night's tension lodge in her chest like a knot. Anna set her rifle down, momentarily rolling her shoulders. So we stand watch. No sleep for us, I suppose. I'll take first watch, Harriet offered. You get some rest in my room if you can. I'll wake you after a few hours. Anna hesitated, scanning Harriet's face. You sure? Harriet nodded. I've gone on less sleep before I'll be fine. She glanced at the shut door. Make sure you keep your pistol within reach, even while you doze. In the dim hallway, Harriet and Anna parted ways. Anna heading to the small bedroom Harriet occupied. Harriet remained carbine in hand, posture stiff. The storm outside had begun to ebb slightly, though rain still fell steadily. She heard a rumble of voices behind the storage room door, muffled by thick wood. No words were discernible, just the low hum of men conferring in hushed tones. Probably they were rehashing the negotiations, or plotting a way to double-cross Harriet in the morning. Harriet moved to the kitchen and stoked the fire in the small hearth, letting the embers brighten. She'd stay within earshot of the storage room, her senses on high alert. Every so often she checked the makeshift bar across the door, ensuring the Delgados hadn't tried to push it open. As midnight approached, she carried a battered wooden stool into the hallway and positioned it near the storage room. Sitting down with the Spencer resting across her lap, Harriet felt a wave of exhaustion. The day had been endless, clashing with the Delgado brothers, masking her identity, fighting the storm-feeding animals, and trying to keep Anna safe. Outside, the wind hissed and rain drummed a monotonous lullaby. Harriet's thoughts drifted backward through the years, memories swirling. She saw herself as a younger woman, hair as red as flame, wearing trousers when most women dared not, gun belts slung low on her hips. She remembered nights in hidden camps outwitting bounty hunters in the dead of winter, and that final day at Red Cliff Gulch when the cavalry believed they had cornered the famed Scarlet Harriet Galloway. She and her last remaining allies had staged an elaborate ruse. False bodies carefully arranged illusions of a fiery shootout in which Harriet appeared to be struck down. The cavalry, convinced they'd witnessed her death, left the scene. Harriet limped away wounded, determined never to repeat such a life. She inhaled sharply. That was more than 15 years ago. Since then, she'd built this orchard, forging a new identity. She had no illusions about redemption. She knew some people would label her an irredeemable outlaw. But at least she hadn't spent the latter half of her life robbing and killing. She'd learned the value of small satisfactions, fresh apples in the fall, a well-mended fence, a kind word shared with a neighbor. Now the Delgados threatened to shatter that quiet existence, and Harriet in her old age was forced to draw on old instincts. She glanced at the door again. Somewhere beyond it, 5 men debated how to come out on top. But Harriet, too, had her own secrets hidden, compartments in the barn caches of coins she'd accumulated. Those she hadn't spent or donated were far fewer than rumored, but still enough to draw the greed of desperate men. Outside, a lightning flash briefly turned the windows into mirrors of white glare. Harriet blinked away the afterimage and steadied her breathing. She could endure the night she'd endured worse. In a strange way, the tension felt familiar. A dark echo of her younger days spent on guard. It's only until dawn, she told herself. Then one way or another, this ends. By the time the embers in the hearth began to die down, Harriet realized hours had passed. Her back throbbed from sitting on the hard stool and her eyelids felt weighted. She forced herself to stand, stretching stiff muscles, then paced the hallway to maintain alertness. The house was otherwise silent. Anna slept in the back room, the goats and chickens presumably huddled in their pens, and the Delgado brothers confined to the storage room. A faint rattle made Harriet freeze. She snatched up her carbine and pressed her ear to the storage room door. Another rattle like wood scraping on wood heart pounding. Harriet nudged the bar aside an inch, just enough to peer through the narrow slit into the room. Inside, flickering lamplight revealed the 5 men crowded on the bench and floor ropes piled at their feet. Her stomach clenched. Ropes piled at their feet. They were no longer bound. Instead, they seemed to be searching for something on the floor, rummaging as quietly as possible. Harriet spotted Toby's silhouette near a shelf. Jeb and Rowan crouched together, speaking so softly she caught only fragments. The handle pry, no noise. A spike of adrenaline coursed through Harriet. They've freed themselves, she realized. I must have dozed off, or they managed it while I was stoking the fire. She readied the carbine, every nerve on edge. Flinging the door open for a frontal confrontation might be the fastest way to escalate to gunfire, and Harriet wanted to avoid that if possible. She also didn't want them escaping deeper into the house. Carefully, Harriet slid the bar back into place, effectively locking the door from the outside. She placed a hand against the wood, feeling the vibrations as the brothers moved around. At least they're still inside, she thought. If they tried to break down the door, Harriet had a vantage point from the hallway. She glanced toward Anna's bedroom door. Should she wake her? Harriet hesitated, weighing the options. If the Delgados realized Harriet wasn't alone, they might rush the door or try something desperate. Harriet decided she needed Anna's backup. There were 5 men in that room, all potentially armed if they found any hidden implements. She tiptoed to Anna's room, opened the door a crack, and hissed, "Anna, wake up quietly." Within seconds, Anna was on her feet, pistol in one hand. Harriet whispered the situation, and Anna's eyes went wide with alarm. Together, they moved back into the hallway. Harriet gestured for Anna to keep watch at one angle, while Harriet braced herself at the door. The scuffling sounds continued, accompanied by muffled curses. Jeb's voice rose. "Rowan, it's jammed, we can't." Rowan hissed something in reply. Harriet's heart pounded. She tightened her grip on the carbine, preparing for a potential onslaught. "If they break through, we aim to wound, not kill," Harriet reminded herself. If that's possible, neither Harriet nor Anna spoke. Their stance said everything. 2 armed women resolved to hold the line, each brimming with tension from a lifetime of not wanting to fire first, but ready to do so if forced. Whatever negotiation had transpired earlier was now hanging by a thread. Dawn remained hours away, and the stage was set for a final confrontation within Harriet Welburn's fortified walls. Harriet Welburn pressed herself tight against the storage room door, the Spencer carbine gripped firmly in her weathered hands. On the other side of the thick wood, she could hear the Delgado brothers moving about with hushed urgency, their quiet curses punctuated by scraping sounds. A single lantern inside the room flickered, casting restless shadows on the gap beneath the door. Harriet's mind raced. Only a short time ago, she had secured them with ropes, confident they would remain bound until dawn. Now it was obvious they had freed themselves. The question was how and when they planned to break out. Taking a silent step backward, Harriet motioned for Anna to stand on the far side of the narrow hallway. The younger woman carried her rifle with practiced poise, eyes locked on the door. Harriet could almost taste the tension in the stale air, a familiar tang of danger that made her simultaneously alert and wary. Thunder rumbled in the distance, weaker now than before, but still enough to reverberate through the half-repaired shutters. From behind the door came the muted voice of Rowan Delgado, evidently directing his brothers. Harriet caught fragments of phrases, "Leave her slowly, edge it," and realized they were attempting to pry open or dismantle the door from within. They might have found a piece of metal on the shelves or some tool Harriet had overlooked. She cursed herself for not more thoroughly searching every corner of the storage room. Then again, it had been late. She was exhausted, and even with ropes binding them, the Delgado clan was resourceful. Pressing her ear close, Harriet detected a soft grunt from Jeb or Mace, followed by the sound of wood under pressure. The door trembled slightly in its frame. Her heart thudded in her chest. If the door gave way, Suddenly, the brothers could pour out into the hall 5 strong and desperate men against 2 armed women. Harriet had the advantage of weaponry and vantage, but she learned long ago not to underestimate cornered outlaws, especially a group with the varied skills the Delgados possessed. Standing at Harriet's side, Anna tightened her grip on her rifle. The younger woman's face was set, jaw clenched, but Harriet recognized the flicker of fear in her eyes. Harriet gave her a slight nod, wordlessly communicating, "Stay calm, we act together." Over the past 2 years, they had faced lesser threats, would-be thieves or drifters, testing Harriet's frail widow disguise, but never a confrontation this prolonged or orchestrated. Another loud creak came from the door. In the faint lantern light leaking from beneath it, Harriet noticed the bar she'd placed across the latch shift a fraction of an inch. It was a sturdy piece of oak, but if the brothers were prying from the inside, they might be able to pop the hinges or crack the door frame. Harriet swallowed against the dryness in her throat. If that happened, she and Anna had seconds to decide whether to fire, to threaten, or to retreat. Lightning flickered through a gap in the curtains at the far end of the hallway, illuminating the tense tableau. Harriet exhaled forcibly, calming her breathing. They will not take this house from me. She had built this life, this orchard brick by careful brick, and she would not see it destroyed by men chasing rumors of gold. If a final showdown was inevitable, she would make certain the Delgados understood they were gambling with their very lives. Inside the storage room, the Delgado brothers could feel their window of opportunity closing. They had managed to slip their ropes, thanks in part to the hidden knife Dylan had picked from the shelves when Harriet's back was turned. Now, in the unstable glow of the single lantern, they worked in tense coordination. Rowan knelt near the door's edge, using a piece of iron bracket to wedge beneath one hinge. Jeb hovered behind him, hands gripping the makeshift pry bar. Whenever Rowan needed extra force, Mace was rummaging through crates of apples and sealed preserves, searching for anything that could serve as a blunt weapon. Toby, the youngest, stood off to the side, breathing heavily. He glanced repeatedly at Dylan, whose gaze remained fixed on the door. Toby's face flickered with doubt. He whispered, "Rowan, are you sure about this? That old lady threatened to kill us if we try anything." Rowan paused, sweat beading on his forehead, despite the room's chill. "You think we just sit here and wait for her to hand us a coin apiece? We'll never be free that way. If we bust out and corner them, we can force a better deal or find whatever gold she's hiding for real." His voice was a low growl, frustration laced with ambition. Dylan, crouching near the lantern, heard every word. He kept his expression impassive, though Harriet's earlier warning echoed in his mind. He'd approached her outside in the storm, offering a private arrangement, 2 or 3 coins so he could vanish from the outlaw life forever. Now that the group was attempting a breakout, Dylan wondered if he should sabotage their efforts, but any move to help Harriet might end badly if his brothers detected his betrayal. "Mitch, that hinge, come on," Rowan urged, and Jeb dug the iron bracket deeper. The top hinge groaned, the pin shifting slightly. A surge of anticipation spread through the men. Toby bit his lip, obviously torn, but moved closer to help Mace return from his search with a small hammer evidently used for tapping barrel lids. He offered it to Rowan with a grim nod. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, reminding them the storm still lingered. The orchard beyond the walls was dark and sodden. The men felt an undercurrent of desperation if they didn't act. Now Harriet might strengthen her hold by morning, or worse, deliver them to a returning sheriff. Jeb sneered, imagining the old woman's face when they came bursting out. That mental image fueled him, overshadowing any caution he might have felt. Dylan forced himself to appear cooperative, if hesitant. He pressed a hand against the door's lower panel, testing its give. He knew Harriet was likely right there with her rifle ready to fire. The last thing he wanted was to be in the line of bullets. Yet Rowan's mindset was clear. If we must shoot, we shoot. There would be no turning back once the door splintered open. A trickle of sweat ran down Dylan's neck. He hadn't asked for a standoff in some remote farmhouse. He'd quietly hoped Harriet's deal coins for silence would allow him to slip away. Now, with all 5 men working on the door, a violent confrontation seemed all but inevitable. He found himself wishing Harriet would take a different approach, maybe barge in and fire a warning shot, scaring them into submission. But Harriet Welburn, or Scarlet Harriet Galloway, if she truly was that woman, wasn't the type for half measures, Rowan hissed. "On 3 we press up. 1, 2. He never said 3 because That instant, the door shook from the other side, someone testing its resilience. The men froze, hearts thumping. For a breathless span, neither side moved. Then Rowan signaled for silence. They waited outside, the thunder rolled faintly. It was a question of who would act first. Harriet leaned her weight against the door, listening intently for any shift that might precede the brothers' assault. Anna stood a pace behind her rifle, angled toward the door's center finger, near the trigger. Although Harriet could not see the Delgados, she pictured them hunched in the lantern, glow, every muscle coiled. If they managed to pop the hinges, Harriet and Anna would have only a split second to react. Still, Harriet wanted to avoid a bloodbath. Over the long years, she'd told herself that violence was the last recourse of someone cornered by fate, and she had no desire to be that person again. But the Delgados, driven by desperation and greed, might not let her choose a peaceful path. She forced a slow, even breath. If it came to a fight, she would not hesitate, Anna. She whispered without turning, "Keep to the side. If that door comes off, you'll have a clear line to the interior. We aim to stop them fast, shoulders or legs, unless we've no other choice." Harriet's instructions carried a grim determination. It would be far simpler tactically to fire through the door, but Harriet refused to shoot blind and risk killing them outright. Behind the door, the sounds of the Delgados seemed to pause. Harriet wondered if her push had deterred them. She glanced over her shoulder at Anna, who gave a small shake of her head, indicating she still heard movement from within. Harriet nodded. If the Delgados thought they could surprise her, they were mistaken. She'd outwitted federal marshals and Pinkertons in her youth. 5 men behind a pantry door would not outfox her. Now time crawled, each heartbeat magnified by the hush of the house and the storm's steady patter. Harriet counted her options. If they forcibly broke through, she could retreat down the hallway, forcing them into a bottleneck Anna could cover from a side angle near the kitchen archway. If the men tried to scatter, Harriet would track them one by one. All these scenarios played out in her mind, overshadowed by a single thought. This is precisely the outcome I wanted to avoid. Her knuckles tightened on the Spencer stock. A memory came unbidden, a night decades earlier, when Harriet had waited outside a railway office door in a similar posture, listening for guards inside. Then she'd been leading a gang of her own, orchestrating a theft she believed would right past wrongs. Now, ironically, she was on the other side of the confrontation, protecting her modest life from thieves. The role reversal felt like some cosmic joke, a final test of Harriet's resolve. A soft scraping from inside the storage room returned Harriet's focus to the present. She pictured the hinges slowly loosening. Enough, Harriet stepped back, braced the carbine, and wrapped the door with the barrel. "Delgado men," she said in a clear, commanding tone. "I hear you messing with the hinges. This is your last warning. Back away or I'll shoot through the door." Anna's eyes flicked to Harriet, silently confirming her readiness to back that threat. For several heartbeats, no one spoke. Rain hissed outside and thunder grumbled in the far distance. Harriet wondered if they'd call her bluff. She wasn't entirely bluffing. She could put a bullet through the door at chest height, likely wounding someone, but Harriet hoped they would surrender to reason. A muffled voice, likely Rowan's, came from inside. "No need for that, ma'am. We're just making ourselves comfortable. We can't sleep well tied up." Harriet swallowed a bitter laugh. They thought they could spin a quick lie, as if she hadn't heard the prying, but she'd give them one more chance to stand down. "You move that hinge again," Harriet declared, "and I'll consider it an act of war. Rest quietly till morning or face the consequences." Inside the storage room, Rowan clenched his jaw at Harriet's warning. The wedge of metal they'd been using to pry the hinge was still lodged under the top pin, and Jeb's hands hovered near it. The tension felt suffocating. Toby's eyes darted from Rowan to Dylan, seeking guidance. Mace stood near the back wall, that small hammer still in hand, his expression grim. "How do we proceed?" Jeb hissed, glancing at his older brother. "We can't just sit here like whipped dogs." Rowan's scowl deepened. He had never been bested so thoroughly, first tied up, then discovered mid-breakout. Harriet's threat, delivered through the door, in that calm, no-nonsense tone, carried weight. If they pressed forward, she would shoot. Maybe the wooden barrier would reduce the bullet's velocity, but it wouldn't stop it entirely. Rowan didn't fancy being the one to test Harriet's resolve. Dylan, sensing Rowan's hesitation, intervened. We don't have a good angle, Rowan. And we'd be funneling ourselves into the hallway if we succeed. Let's wait. We can still try to negotiate in the morning. He spoke with forced nonchalance, concealing the relief he felt at Harriet's intervention. If the brothers rushed out, the odds of a lethal firefight soared, and Dylan's half-formed plan to slip away peacefully would vanish. Negotiate. Jeb spat. I'm done with talk. We nearly had that door off. Yeah, and we nearly had a bullet in the chest too, Toby countered, swallowing hard. You heard her, Mace exhaled, pressing the hammer against his thigh. Jeb, Toby, listen. We can't fight bullets with a crowbar and a hammer in a cramped hallway. Maybe we stall Dawn's only a few hours off and we'll get a better chance once she lowers her guard to hand over coins or food. Rowan glared at each of them in turn, his pride warring with his survival instincts. Through the door, Harriet's presence loomed large, a woman who clearly knew how to handle standoffs. Is she truly the fabled Scarlet Harriet Galloway, he wondered. Stories of that legendary bandit queen had circulated for decades, recounting near-mythic heists. If Harriet was indeed that outlaw, it explained her unwavering calm, her thorough preparedness. Fine, Rowan muttered, removing his hand from the door hinge. We'll wait for now. But come dawn, we do whatever it takes to get more than a handful of coins. From the corner, Dylan nodded, relief mingled with dread. He understood Rowan was merely pausing the aggression, not abandoning it. Morning might bring a carefully orchestrated ambush. Dylan also remembered Harriet's mention of the sheriff possibly returning soon, a fact that Rowan seemed to dismiss. If the lawman showed up, the Delgados would be in no position to fight on two fronts. Rowan motioned for Jeb to stow the makeshift pry bar, and Mace placed the hammer on a high shelf. Toby sunk onto a nearby crate, shoulders sagging. A hush settled over the room, broken only by the persistent drum of rain and the ragged breathing of men who tested the door of captivity and found Harriet's iron will on the other side. None of them slept. The lantern's flame wavered, casting elongated shadows against the stacked crates. Dylan pretended to doze off, but behind his half-closed eyelids, his thoughts churned. He might still approach Harriet privately if an opportunity arose. For now, the Delgados' standoff had become a waiting game. And as the night deepened, each man weighed the cost of pitting himself against the hardened woman beyond the door. Hours crept by with agonizing slowness until a pale glimmer filtered through the front windows of Harriet's farmhouse. The storm had passed, leaving puddles across the yard and droplets clinging to the orchard leaves. Dawn was a weary shade of gray, rather than a triumphant burst of sunlight. Even so, Harriet felt the shift like a release of tension. The long night was over. She nudged Anna, who had managed a fitful doze in Harriet's rocking chair near the kitchen. The younger woman stirred, blinking against the faint light. Harriet herself was exhausted, arms stiff from gripping the Spencer carbine half the night. But there was little time to rest. Whatever came next would happen soon. The Delgados would expect movement, food negotiations, or an attempt to relocate them. Anna stood stretching her back until a light pop relieved her taut muscles. So, morning, she said, voice hoarse. We give them something to eat and see if they stay calm. Harriet nodded, rubbing her temples to ease a budding headache. We told them we'd talk at dawn. Let's keep our word, but do not untie them or let them roam. If they try to break loose again, we do what must be done. She hesitated, recalling last night's near confrontation at the storage room door. I just hope they're more reasonable in daylight. She set her carbine against a side table and retrieved a smaller sidearm, a revolver she kept loaded for quick draws. Cover me, she said to Anna, stepping cautiously to the storage room door. The bar remained in place. She rapped twice with the butt of the revolver. Delgados, it's morning. Are we talking or are we fighting? A beat of silence, then Rowan's voice subdued but firm. No fight yet, ma'am. We're ready to talk. Harriet exchanged a guarded look with Anna, then slid the wooden bar aside. She opened the door a crack, peering in. The interior smelled of stale sweat and lantern smoke. All 5 men were awake. Toby perched on a crate, Mace by the wall. Rowan stood in front, ropes lying in a neat pile at his feet. Harriet raised her revolver. Hands where I can see them, all of you. Grudgingly they complied, lifting empty palms, no crowbars or hammers in sight. Harriet stepped back, letting Anna cover them from a safer angle. You can come out one by one. Move slow. The men emerged blinking at the washed-out dawn. Their clothes were rumpled, eyes ringed with exhaustion. Rowan, first to exit, glanced around for possible exits or hidden guns. He found Harriet's revolver aimed at his midsection and Anna's rifle trained on the group from the side. Toby and Jeb looked ready to argue, but Rowan gave them a quelling glare. Harriet signaled them to the kitchen table, where chairs stood waiting. "Sit," she ordered, "and keep your hands on the table." They complied, tension thrumming in every movement. Anna positioned herself near the fireplace, ensuring none of the men had a direct path to rush her. Harriet kept her revolver in sight as she laid out a simple breakfast: bread, cold beans, and leftover coffee warmed on the hearth. She served them with deliberate care, never letting them forget the muzzle pointed in their direction. Toby's stomach growled audibly, and Harriet felt a momentary pang of empathy. Desperate or not, they were still human. Breaking the silence, Harriet said, "Let's settle this. The storm's over. The sheriff might return within a day. I have no interest in seeing him here with you, tied up or worse. You wanted gold for a new life, and you believed I had it. I've told you I can spare some coins, not a fortune. Take it or leave it." Rowan leaned forward, muscles coiled. "We want to see those coins, count them ourselves." "And then what?" Harriet asked coolly. "You right away." "That depends," May said quietly. "Depends on whether the coins are enough to make it worthwhile." Harriet studied the five men, searching for any hint that they'd accept a measured share of gold. Jeb's defiant glower suggested he still craved a bigger haul, while Toby's restless eyes hinted at indecision. Mace's tone was guarded. Rowan's posture a tight spring. Only Dylan seemed somewhat apart, arms folded, gaze sliding from Harriet to Anna and back again. Harriet recalled the whispered conversation she'd had with Dylan in the midst of the storm, his private plea for a quiet exit. He had not yet revealed that to his brothers. "All right," Harriet said, "I'll show you the coins I'm willing to hand over, but I do it on my terms." She motioned toward the hallway. "There's a small lockbox in my bedroom. Anna will stand guard here. If I'm not back in 5 minutes, or if you move so much as an inch from this table, she has instructions to shoot." "Hell of a system you got," Rowan muttered. Harriet offered a thin smile. "I've survived worse." She gestured to Anna, who nodded. Then Harriet backed away, revolver aimed at the group as she slipped into the bedroom. Inside her small sleeping quarters, Harriet exhaled. The bed was unmade, the quilts rumpled. She tugged a trunk away from the wall, revealing a narrow niche in the floorboard, a place she'd often used to store personal items. Lifting the board, she withdrew a battered wooden box. Within it lay a modest assortment of gold coins, just under 2 dozen. Some bore the distinct date stamps from the 1870s, matching the rumored Western Union heist. Others were older or foreign minted, picked up during Harriet's wide-roaming youth. Her heart twisted with old regrets. She'd planned on using these coins sparingly in her twilight years, maybe buying a bit more land or saving them in case of an emergency. Now they would be a bargaining chip to keep the Delgados from tearing her life apart. Harriet counted them quickly. 23 coins in total. She decided to offer them half enough to hint at generosity, but not the entire stash. She would hold back the rest, leaving them stashed in another secret location, if the men insisted on rummaging. Gathering a velvet pouch from her trunk, Harriet slipped in 12 coins and tied it shut. 12 coins for 5 men, she mused. That should be enough to buy supplies and some acreage, assuming they didn't squander it. The question was whether Rowan Delgado would accept that. If he tries to push for more, he'll find out just how serious I am. Steeling herself, Harriet returned to the kitchen. The men were exactly as she'd left them, sitting around the table guarded by Anna. Tension still crackled in the air, but for the moment no one had moved. Harriet lifted the pouch for them to see. 12 coins, she said, tossing it onto the table. "Count them if you like." Toby's eyes lit up. He reached for the pouch, but Rowan snatched it first, loosing the drawstring. One by one, he slid the coins onto the tabletop. In the gray morning light, they shone with a dull luster. Jeb and Mace leaned forward, scrutinizing the dates and mint marks. Toby hovered behind them, trying to get a closer look. Dylan merely observed, arms still folded across his chest. After a tense moment, Rowan frowned. "This is it. You said you could part with some coins, but maybe you've got more hidden away?" Harriet's tone chilled. "That's the offer. Take them and leave or stay until the sheriff arrives and see what justice you get? That's the best I can do. Rowan's eyes flicked from the coins to Harriet, calculating. He tried to gauge if she was bluffing. Perhaps she had another pouch hidden or an entire trunk full. The faint lines of age on Harriet's face revealed little of her inner turmoil. She stood with quiet confidence, revolver in hand, Anna at her side with the rifle. At Rowan's elbow, Jeb bristled. That can't be all. We heard from plenty of folks in the territory. There's a fortune in gold eagles connected to an outlaw named Scarlet Harriet. Don't tell me she only squirreled away a measly dozen. Harriet allowed herself a humorless chuckle. Rumors get bigger each time they're told. Maybe that outlaw spent most of it or shared it with her gang, or lost it along the way. Maybe there never was as much as people claimed. If you're pinning your hopes on tall tales, you'll live a disappointed life. Mace picked up one coin, turning it in his fingers. These are definitely from the 1870s. Could fetch a high price in the right circles. But is it enough to buy us each a new start? Maybe if we split up, 5 men traveling together, spending old gold might draw suspicion. He set the coin back down, brow furrowed. Anna, voice steady, interjected. If you have any sense, you'll do exactly that. Split up, spend them, slowly keep your names off. Wanted posters, better than a bullet or a noose. Toby sighed as though seeing the logic. We sure could use a quiet path out, Rowan. He cast his older brother a pleading look. No more running from lawmen. Rowan drummed his fingers on the table. Dylan stood behind him, silent as a shadow, seeming to watch Harriet rather than the coins. Finally, Rowan spoke. We want no trouble with the sheriff. We take these coins and ride out, but we'll need our weapons back too. Harriet shook her head. Your horses, yes. Your guns, no. You can acquire replacements elsewhere. I'm not arming you under my own roof, not after last night's stunt in the storage room. Jeb snarled, but Rowan silenced him with a raised palm. Fine, Rowan said, though Harriet could see the annoyance in his eyes. We get the coins, our horses, and some basic provisions. If you have them, then we'll be gone by midday. A surge of relief fluttered in Harriet's chest, but she kept her expression guarded. Anna will help gather rations. Then you leave, and we never see you again. Agreed, Rowan said, though the words sounded like it lodged painfully in his throat. He swept the coins back into the pouch, tying it tight. At the other end of the table, Toby exhaled in what appeared to be genuine relief, while Jeb glowered, suspecting they were settling for too little. Mace merely glanced at Harriet, an uncertain truce in his gaze. Dylan still said nothing, lingering at the edge of the group. Harriet wondered if he'd try to approach her again privately, or if he'd simply slip away as promised. In any case, she couldn't let her guard drop. Even now, with an agreement on the table, the Delgados were dangerous men. A single flicker of greed or mistrust could ignite fresh violence. Anna, under Harriet's direction, gathered a small sack of provisions, a few strips of salted, jerky hardtack biscuits, and some dried fruit. It was enough for a couple of days on the road, though. Certainly not a feast. As she packed them into a burlap pouch, Harriet kept watch over the Delgado brothers, ensuring no one tried to slip away or search the house. The men stood clustered near the table coins, now hidden in Rowan's jacket pocket, their expressions a mix of resignation and pent-up tension. Toby kept glancing at Harriet, perhaps trying to reconcile the calm, silver-haired widow before him with the rumored figure of legend. Jeb avoided eye contact, arms folded, temper. Clearly simmering, Mace maintained a guarded air, scanning the corners of the room for any last-second betrayal. Dylan's gaze slid to Anna, who shot him a quizzical look, but he didn't speak. Finally, Anna tied the burlap pouch shut. That's everything we can spare, she said tersely. We'll walk you out to your horses, then you leave. Rowan nodded. We'll ride for a day or two, find a place to rest. If the sheriff's on our trail, we'll be long gone by then. His tone carried a hint of satisfaction he'd gotten what he came for, albeit less than he'd hoped, and escaped a lethal showdown. Harriet couldn't say she blamed him for wanting to exit swiftly, though she still found his arrogance grating. Harriet flicked her eyes to Anna. Take them out through the barn. I'll stay behind with my revolver pointed. If they try anything, you drop and I fire. Understood, Anna stiffened. Yes, she gestured to the men. All right, let's go. Single file, no sudden moves. The Delgados complied, forming a line that ended with Rowan bringing up the rear. Toby went first, stepping gingerly across the threshold, as though expecting Harriet to renege on her word. Outside, the morning light revealed the orchard's glistening leaves and puddles dotting the yard. The sky was still heavy with clouds, but the storm had subdued, leaving behind a faint mist. Harriet followed at a distance, revolver in hand. The orchard felt almost tranquil in the damp, though her nerves were anything but. Approaching the barn, she recalled the enhancements she'd made to the structure: reinforced walls, a false stall in the back. She thanked her younger self for that cunning. If the Delgados had probed further last night, they might have discovered Harriet's deeper secrets. The horses stood in their makeshift stalls, restless but unharmed. Anna waved for the men to retrieve their mounts. "No quick moves," she warned. "We'll be watching." Jeb glared in her direction, but Toby and Mace quietly began untying their horses. Dylan placed a reassuring hand on his mare's flank, murmuring softly to calm her. Rowan stepped into a stall to gather his gear, which Harriet and Anna had piled in a corner. While they saddled up, Harriet lingered near the barn door. She had half expected a last-second betrayal, someone lunging for a hidden weapon, or Jeb making a desperate attempt to wrest Harriet's revolver away. But so far, the men seemed content to claim the coins and leave. Perhaps they recognized that Harriet, with Anna at her side, was more than capable of gunning them down if they tried anything. At last, one by one, the Delgados guided their horses out of the barn. The damp morning air smelled of hay and wet leather. Toby, perched somewhat awkwardly on his saddle, gave Harriet a final searching look. "If you really are that old outlaw, thanks for letting us live." "And for these," he said, patting the coin pouch on his belt. She nodded, not dignifying his speculation about her identity with an answer. "Ride safe," Harriet said, keeping her voice neutral. "And don't let me see you again." The 5 men rode out single file across the muddy yard that sloped away from Harriet's orchard. Rowan led, posture rigid, the coin pouch hidden in his jacket. Toby followed, then Mace, Jeb, and lastly Dylan, who lagged a moment as if wanting to speak. Harriet met his eyes from a distance, uncertain whether he would attempt another private plea, but he merely dipped his head in a barely perceptible gesture, then nudged his horse forward to catch up. Harriet and Anna stood at the barn entrance, watching them vanish around a bend in the trail. The orchard's dripping branches shuddered in a mild breeze, scattering droplets that glittered momentarily in the weak sunlight. Harriet's shoulders relaxed fractionally as the riders disappeared behind a stand of pines. Yet the memory of the long night's tension remained coiled in her muscles. "They're gone," Anna said softly, lowering her rifle. She exhaled as though releasing a breath she'd been holding since dusk the previous day. "Do you really think they'll stay away for good?" Harriet tucked her revolver into her apron pocket. "Hard to say. They have enough gold to make a new start if they're smart. But men like Rowan might never be satisfied. Still, he knows returning here would be suicidal." She paused, scanning the distant trail. "I believe we've seen the last of them." Anna stepped outside, walking around to check the barn's perimeter. Mud caked her boots from the watery ground. Harriet followed, silent for a moment, as they passed the spot where Toby had tried to pry open the false wall the day before. Thankfully, the Delgados never fully discovered the barn's deeper compartments, nor Harriet's stored keepsakes. Her old wanted posters, the coded ledger of robberies, and the small remainder of gold she hadn't shown them. As they moved back toward the house, Harriet noticed the sky beginning to brighten, the clouds drifting apart to reveal pale blue beneath. The storm's parting left the valley with a crisp, cool air. A few birds chirped tentatively from the orchard, as if testing the weather. It would have felt peaceful if not for the adrenaline coursing through Harriet's veins. Re-entering the farmhouse. Harriet set her revolver on the kitchen table. The interior felt claustrophobic after the night of confrontation. She gazed at the chairs where the Delgado brothers had sat just minutes ago, uneasy remnants of tension still hovering in the corners. Anna let out a low whistle, placing her rifle aside. "Harriet, do you think we handled this the right way?" Harriet's expression softened. She knew Anna carried doubts about showing mercy, about revealing any gold, about letting armed men ride off freely. Harriet herself wasn't entirely sure. "It was the best option we had," she said quietly. "Turning them over to the sheriff could have exposed me. Killing them would have weighed on my conscience. Negotiating was the only path that kept our lives intact." Anna nodded, but worry lingered in her eyes. What if rumors spread? They might let it slip that you're more than just a widow. Harriet gripped Anna's shoulder. They might, but if they do, it won't be easy for anyone to prove. I've covered my tracks for almost 2 decades. The Delgados have bigger troubles than stirring up old ghosts. Let's trust they'll stay busy, living their new lives. She drew a deep breath, letting the tension seep out. Now let's tidy up. We have a farm to run. Harriet and Anna spent the next hours in a subdued routine, as though performing ordinary tasks could dissolve the traces of turmoil left by the Delgado gang. They mended fences knocked loose by the storm, drained the puddles in the goat pen, and inspected the orchard's trees for damage. The aroma of damp earth and fresh leaves filled Harriet's senses, reminding her that the orchard still demanded care, no matter how many outlaws darkened her doorstep. Yet despite the surface calm, Harriet's mind churned with the aftermath. She considered the possibility of Dylan Delgado returning at some future date. He had seemed the most conflicted, the one who approached her, secretly wanting a few coins to vanish forever. If he truly intended to break from his brothers, maybe he would find a new life in some distant town. Harriet found herself hoping he would, if only to prove that redemption was possible. If I could leave that life behind, so can he, she told herself. As the sun rose higher, Harriet tested the depth of the orchard soil, which had been thoroughly soaked by the rain. No sign of rot or flood damage, thankfully. Anna joined her carrying a shovel and buckets. The two of them worked in companionable silence, clearing away debris. Occasionally, Anna shot Harriet a questioning glance, as if to ask how the older woman truly felt about everything. Harriet merely gave a reassuring nod. Words weren't needed. They both understood the tension that came from nearly crossing a line you could never uncross. By midday, the clouds had scattered, revealing a clean, bright sky. Harriet removed her bonnet and wiped her brow, feeling the sun's warmth on her face. She walked to the small knoll behind the barn, a spot that overlooked the valley. From there, she could see for miles the shimmering expanse of open fields beyond Peace Haven Fork, the thread of a dirt road winding toward a distant pass. No sign of the Delgados, just emptiness, fading into the horizon. Memories flickered times she had stood on similar overlooks, planning ambushes or scouting for lawmen. The old Harriet Galloway had thrived on that adrenaline, believed in a brand of justice that involved taking what was owed and vanishing into the wild. Now Harriet Welburn lived for quiet mornings of orchard work, shared suppers with Anna, and the satisfaction of providing for the townsfolk who knew her only as a generous widow. The contrast was stark, and Harriet felt oddly grateful for it. She had, in a sense, built a second life from the ashes of the first returning to the farmhouse. Harriet found Anna preparing a simple lunch, bread, cheese, and dried apples. The younger woman forced a wry smile. Hard to believe last night even happened, she murmured, slicing into a wheel of cheese. But the fresh bullet holes in the door, those are real enough. Harriet glanced at the storage room door, where she'd fired a warning shot at one point to deter the brothers from forcing the hinge. A neat hole ringed with splinters marred the wood. Harriet felt a pang of regret, seeing the damage. "We'll fix it," she said softly. "Small price to pay." They ate in silence, each lost in thought. The orchard lay beyond the window, tranquil, yet still carrying the intangible weight of Harriet's past. Perhaps the Delgados would spread word, or perhaps they'd vanish without leaving a ripple. Either way, Harriet had faced another threat and survived. The following days passed without incident. Harriet resumed her usual trips into Peace Haven Fork, loading her wagon with preserves and eggs to sell or barter. Anna accompanied her, scanning the roads for any sign of ambush. But the journey was uneventful. No one lurked behind the pines or along the gentle curves of the trail. In town, Sheriff Everett Wade had returned from his prisoner transport, greeting Harriet politely, but with no sign of heightened suspicion. It seemed the Delgados had departed quietly, leaving no trail of rumor. At the general store, Harriet overheard mention of some strangers passing through a few days back, but the details were vague. Rumor had it they bought supplies and left heading north, paying with older coins. Harriet's heart jumped at that mention, but no one else in the store appeared particularly curious. The clerk shrugged off the story. Plenty of travelers used old money these days. Harriet allowed herself a subdued smile. The Delgados were staying under the radar, at least for now. Back home, Harriet and Anna settled into a cautious normalcy. They patched the barn roof, replaced a few cracked boards, and reorganized the storage room. Harriet took the opportunity to hide her remaining coins and personal effects in a safer compartment, one even Anna only partly knew about. The less Anna had to explain, the better Harriet trusted her. But old habits of secrecy died hard. On a crisp afternoon, about a week after the Delgado incident, Harriet found herself sitting on her porch, mending a tear in her apron. The orchard rustled with a gentle breeze. Anna was off checking the goats, humming a tune Harriet recognized from a traveling show. For a moment, Harriet felt truly at ease, lulled by the monotony of needle and thread. She let her mind wander. Was this the final brush with her old life? She had survived Pinkerton's cavalry raids and bounty hunters. She had orchestrated robberies that once made front-page news in distant cities. Time had whittled away the legends, leaving Harriet Galloway presumed dead, replaced by a reclusive widow who baked pies and tended goats. The Delgado brothers had come close to exposing the fragile seams of Harriet's facade. She wondered how many more tests she might endure before age or fate claimed her. A flash of motion on the ridge made Harriet's heart jolt, but it was only a lone rider, Jed Miller, a neighboring rancher. He tipped his hat as he passed, calling out a friendly greeting. Harriet waved back, needles safely tucked into her lap. Life carried on. Perhaps that was her greatest victory, continuing with the quiet routines of orchard tending, quilt sewing, and the occasional smile from a passing neighbor. When Anna returned, Harriet rose to greet her, resting a hand lightly on the younger woman's shoulder. "We still have apples to sell in a fortnight," Harriet said. No sense letting the orchard's bounty go to waste. Anna smiled, relief and admiration shining in her eyes. "I'm ready whenever you are." Harriet. The unspoken understanding was that they would face any new challenge the same way together, armed with cunning and the unwavering resolve that had seen them through this last ordeal. Days turned into weeks, and the Delgado brothers became a distant memory, a shadow that passed over Harriet's life, but did not extinguish it. With the orchard coming into a late-season bloom, Harriet and Anna poured their energies into harvesting early apples, pruning the branches, and reinforcing the fences. The hush of summer's end brought a gentle rhythm. Morning chores, midday rest under the shade of an old oak, and evenings by the small hearth. Yet Harriet never relaxed her vigilance entirely. She stayed attuned to stray rumors in Peacehaven Fork, dropping subtle questions about traveling men or unusual gold transactions. Nothing suggested the Delgados were stirring trouble. If anything, it seemed they had vanished northward, as planned. Anna noted Harriet's continued watchfulness, but didn't comment. She understood Harriet's reasons. Sometimes in the quiet of dusk, Harriet walked to the small rise overlooking her property, scanning the horizon. One evening, she caught sight of a hawk circling high above, wings outstretched. She watched entranced by its effortless glide, thinking how, once she had dreamed of such freedom, a freedom from law, from the constraints of a society that refused to see women as equals. She had tasted that life under the name Scarlet Harriet Galloway, but found it came with a constant burden of fear and violence. Now, ironically, she cherished the simpler freedom of a stable homestead, no longer dogged by Pinkertons or forced into endless flight. Anna's presence provided a quiet companionship Harriet had never expected. They shared an unspoken bond, each shaped by the hardships of womanhood, in a land dominated by men who saw them as prey or property. Harriet had carved a path outside the law. Anna, raised in a traveling show, had grown adept at reading illusions and surviving on wits. Together, they formed a duo that neither the law nor roving outlaws could easily underestimate. The Delgado incident served as a testament to that. One late afternoon, as Harriet pruned a fruit-laden branch, Anna called her from the porch. A rider approached from the main road. Sheriff Everett Wade had tipped low, guiding his horse with an easy grace. Harriet's heart quickened, but she forced a calm expression. She wiped sweat from her brow, stepping out from beneath the apple tree as Wade dismounted. "Afternoon, Mrs. Welburn," the sheriff said politely, nodding to Anna as well. "Just making my rounds, seeing how folks fared after that big storm a ways back." "You two all right?" Harriet smiled mildly. "We're fine, Sheriff, thank you. A few loose boards, but we fixed them. The orchard's thriving." "How about you?" Wade pushed back his brim, scanning the tidy farm. "Heard rumors of some troublemakers passing through the territory. Folks said a group of 5 men, rowdy types. They didn't stir up trouble here, did they?" Anna's eyes flicked to Harriet, who calmly answered, "We had a couple of travelers ask for water, but they moved on. Nothing serious. Why is there a bounty on them?" Wade shrugged. "Not that I know of, just folks talking. If you see anything suspicious, you let me know. Don't hesitate to wire me at the office." Harriet thanked him and the sheriff departed, tipping his hat once more. As he rode off, Harriet felt a swell of relief. The Delgados had left no damning trace. She turned to Anna, who offered a small wry grin. "See, life goes on." Harriet patted the trunk of the nearest apple tree. Yes, life goes on. And in the hush that followed, the orchard seemed to breathe with them, a sanctuary forged by Harriet's unyielding resolve. The storm had passed, the outlaws had gone, and for now at least Harriet Welburn and the legend she once was could continue in peaceful anonymity. In the aftermath of a tense standoff, Harriet Welburn proves that courage and wit can overcome even the most dangerous odds. Having confronted her violent past without compromising the quiet life she cherishes, Harriet demonstrates the enduring power of resilience, determination, and the ability to forge new paths. Her orchard remains a symbol of growth and renewal, proof that no one is ever beyond redemption or too old for new beginnings. What do you think, friends? Was Harriet right to offer mercy and spare the Delgado gang? Or should she have taken harsher action? Share your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective, and remember, your support means everything to us, so please subscribe and click the notification bell for more inspiring stories of bravery, wisdom, and justice from the frontier. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next exciting adventure.